Where do you want me to You just start at the beginning.
Friend, family member, murderer?
You never know what's real behind the scenes.
He shot him between the eyes.
No person should die like that.
What are you doing?
These are the stories of the victims killed by someone they knew.
You can only handle so much before you snap.
She's evil.
You know, I'm your flesh and blood.
Someone They Knew with Tamron Hall. All-day marathon begins today at 8/7 Central on Court TV.
Is he alive?
Bullet casings. That was the only physical evidence they had.
It was a good thing I threw the gun away where I did, because if I didn't, I probably would have shot him point blank right between the eyes.
I point blank tell her, I think you did it, and she looks at me and says, prove it.
The first person who confesses is usually the one that gets the best deal.
Did he ever mention how much more money he was supposed to get? $30,000.
We know it was someone he knew.
On a warm summer night in Florida, a man answers a knock at the door, steps outside, and is shot dead on his doorstep. The obvious suspect has a perfect alibi, but through investigative tenacity and a lucky break, police uncover a twisted plot that would lead to more than one person facing the death penalty.
Holly Hill is kind of a bedroom community situated between Daytona Beach, which we are connected to on the south end, and Ormond Beach, which we're connected to on the north end.
John Catania was a 45-year-old plumber. He'd been married to Karen Toby for about 4 years, had a 2-year-old.
Lynn Blake lived next door in the other duplex. She worked for John, and she also acted as the nanny babysitter of John Catania's son. I think he was 2 years old at the time. She was very close friends with Karen Toby, John's wife. In fact, they did everything together. Phyllis Catania was John's mother. His mother was staying with him at the time. His mother was in the house, and there was a knock on the door. Karen was asleep in the bedroom, and John was sitting in the living room. His mother went to the door, asked who it was. She couldn't really hear what the full name was. So she told Catania that there was somebody at the door for him. John went to the door, stepped outside, closed the door behind him. The next thing she heard were some pops.
Our son was shot.
He was shot?
My son.
I need to know where on his body he was shot.
He's laying in the doorway. There's blood everywhere. Blood all around his head.
Is he alive?
I don't see it any movement.
Well, I was called in from home. I arrived. Of course, we had police there already, and there was a body in front of a duplex.
John Catania had been shot 4 times. He'd been shot in the cheek, in the neck, again in the face, and there were bullet fragments that were found in his brain. So he died instantly when he was shot. There were bullet casings. That was the only physical evidence they had. They had no fingerprints, they had no DNA. So the neighbors don't hear a car coming, they don't hear gunshots, they don't hear the screeching of tires, they don't hear screams, they don't hear anything.
That night, I made contact with Karen Toby, John's wife, with Lynn, with John's mother, and Lynn's duplex. Karen had been drinking. I could smell it on her breath, the way she was acting. When I told them that we were going to move them all down to the Homicide Investigation Unit for interviews, she got put out, didn't really want to be bothered. And one of the things she said was, "Can't this wait till tomorrow?"
In my mind, the average wife would say, let's get to it. Let's find out who killed my husband. But she was willing to wait till the next day to talk about it.
John's mother was actually in the house when he was killed as well. So there was proof that Karen wasn't the gunman.
At that point in time, we didn't have a suspect or persons of interest.
We know it was someone he knew because when John opens the door, he goes ahead and just steps right out to talk to the guy like he knew who he was. During this investigation, we're trying to determine if any of these people have a motive. We find that there's a $500,000 life insurance policy that is less than 2 years old.
He had a new baby and decided that he wanted to provide for his son in case of his death. Even though he got this life insurance policy for his son, Karen, as his wife, was the sole beneficiary.
This was a flag showing a motive that Karen may have had. Karen, of course, was in the bedroom, so she couldn't have shot John. The mother was in the living room with John. Lynn was next door. This was when we started to press her and Lynn about this investigation.
Karen, Toby, and Lynn Blake had a very codependent relationship. At times when I was watching them together, it appeared that Karen was in charge. At other times, in talking to people that had encounters with him, Lynn was in charge. Karen doesn't have a mother figure in her life, so Lynn is that mother figure and the grandmother figure, because there's this little boy named Lewis, the child of John and Karen, and Lynn loves this baby.
Lynn used to drive Karen wherever she needed to go because Karen had a problem with alcohol and drugs.
She was world class. She could go through a case of beer in a day, and she would do it day after day. She had medication for her mental health problems, but I think she also was abusing some street drugs, but her main thing was drinking.
Karen Toby was suffering from various substance use, psychiatric, and medical issues. She had hepatitis C, which is a virus that affects the liver. Drinking heavily on top of liver damage from hepatitis C, it's a good way to die young.
Karen and Lynn show up at the Holly Hill Police Department and notify us that they're going to go to Seattle. And that's where Karen is from.
Her father lived in Seattle. Her sister lived out in Seattle. She went out there. We still didn't know who did the shooting.
I get on a plane and I go to Seattle. I show up at Karen Toby's home and ask her if she'd submit to an interview, particularly a lie detector test. During that attempted lie detector test, the first one, Karen actually admits to taking several different drugs, and the lie detector operator says, this won't work. So we talk to Karen, please come back tomorrow. Let's try it again. Less drugs, please. The next day, she shows up. We do the lie detector. The operator indicates to me that she's trying to be deceptive. She refuses to let me interview her. I point blank tell her, I think you did it. And she looks at me and says, prove it. I said, I will prove it, and I will see you in prison.
My boyfriend, Tyson Cooper. Okay. I think they had something to do with it. And then they got killed.
In the shooting death of Florida plumber John Catania, police were looking at his wife, Karen Toby, and her best friend, Lynn Blake, as possible suspects. Karen Toby's actions seemed suspicious in the aftermath of the killing, but she had an ironclad alibi. Then, a month after the murder, a new suspect emerged.
John Cooper was working as a plumber's helper for John Catania. John gave him a job because he felt sorry for him because John was just released from prison. John got into a physical altercation with his girlfriend, Samantha Alexander. There was a call to Ormond Beach about a domestic dispute there at the house. Samantha did not want to press any charges, but she did say that John is going to go to jail because he killed his boss man in Holly Hill or he had something to do with it. The officer called us and informed us of what was said up there and what had taken place.
I get some gifts in this case. I get Tyjon Cooper beating up his girlfriend, and the girlfriend then, after getting beat up and have her arm broke, she decides to tell on him.
Well, we think you might have some information. Yes, my boyfriend, Tyjon Cooper. Okay. I think they had something to do with, the man that got killed in Hollywood, the plumber guy. I heard the phone conversation, and he was talking to his friend, and he was telling his friend the whole story about how it happened. His wife, Karen, was supposed to pay him or something to do it. Did he ever mention how much more money he was supposed to get and when he was supposed to get? $30,000. $30,000, when was he supposed to get it? Supposed to have been after it happened.
This is now a murder for hire investigation, now that we get this information from Tyjon's girlfriend.
I was like, oh, so you did do that? And he was like, and he held me down, he choked me, I had to stop working. He fractured, broke my wrist, and he threatened to kill me.
She gave us enough where we verified that she had a broken wrist. Tyjon was on parole at the time, and we had Tyjon arrested for the domestic violence.
So police go through phone records when they're investigating a crime, and that's how they can often draw the lines between people.
During this investigation, we received some information from Tyjon Cooper's phone records, and we had interviewed the woman who owned one of the phones that was in contact with him. And during this interview, during one of her phone conversations, she hears some loud bangs.
She asked him what the noise was, and Tyjon said, "Oh, don't worry about it, I'm just testing my gun." She said, "Testing your gun? Where are you?" He said, "In my backyard."
Based on that, I write up a search warrant, and we go to Tyjon Cooper's home, and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's crime scene people process the house, and we find a spent shell casing and a spent round in a flower pot.
We collected the cartridge case and sent it to the crime lab. That cartridge case matched one of the cartridge cases found at the murder scene.
It definitively connected Tyjon to the scene where John Catania had been killed. Tyjon's in big trouble.
Lynn was on Karen's case about running her mouth to other people about things that have been going on. Karen would be drinking and lose control of what she was saying sometimes.
As this case unfolds, you can see where Karen is stepping away from Lynn. That's when I started using that to my benefit to drive a bigger wedge between them, because I knew that the two were involved, and I needed one of them to give me the evidence I needed in this case, and I knew that Lynn was the one.
The problem when there's a bunch of people who are committing a crime together is that they can't always keep their stories straight, and somebody is going to talk.
Who was when you killed John with a gun?
I guess Karen was. I wasn't going to.
In the shooting death of John Catania, detectives were convinced they had uncovered a murder-for-hire conspiracy involving 3 suspects. The problem was they couldn't prove it in a court of law, and none of the conspirators were talking. Detectives needed one of the suspects to crack and turn state's evidence against the others.
Sean and I were interviewing Lynn Blake and basically told her, "We know you're involved in all this."
The truth is, we do have a black guy in jail, and we have seized a bullet shell casing that is at the lab. We may make a deal with that guy.
That's fine.
You might have a problem. I'm thinking that you're right now sitting here lying to protect Karen, knowing full well, and that's probably going to be enough for accessory after the fact. You know, 20, 30 years is going to be a life sentence, isn't it?
Yeah.
We tell her basically the first person who comes in and confesses and tells the truth is usually the one that gets the best deal. It really didn't faze Lynn.
Karen has an attorney. He called us and told us to look at you.
I don't know what for.
You don't know what for?
No. This is hilarious. I know I had nothing to do with this.
No?
No.
You don't know anything?
May God strike me dead right where I'm sitting. I don't know.
Sean showed her the Florida statute book about accessories and how they could be charged.
Read this. Take that home. Might be good for you to read later. It's about accessories and principles and things like that with the law.
She calls me the next day, and I bring her down for an interview, and she gives it up.
All started last February, Valentine's Day. John just blew her off. He said, "You don't deserve a Valentine's Day card." And at that point, Karen was clean and sober. He said, "By the way, I'm taking Lewis and we're going to go to New York and live." That was when Karen and I both started asking around to get a gun.
According to Lynn, there was a family reunion that was going to occur in Georgia. And it was her belief and Karen's belief that this reunion was going to be a point in time where John was going to take the baby away from her and at that same time have her committed for her drinking and drugs. So this was the impetus for killing John.
Tyjon was at their house several times. Lynn said that Karen approached Tyjon about getting a gun.
She was talking with Ty, so she asked him, "Can you give me a gun?" And he said, "What for?" And she told him why.
And she told him to kill my husband?
I don't know if she said those words. I think she said, "Well, my husband's trying to take my son from me.
Okay.
And I've got to stop him."
They had met Tyjon out at the mall, and he provided them with a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol. An envelope was passed, and there was like $2,700 in the envelope.
When he handed her the gun, I handed him the money.
Let me make sure I understand this right. Originally, the plan was he was going to get you a gun. Who was going to kill John with a gun?
I guess Karen was. I wasn't going to.
They then take the gun, they go try to shoot it, and it jams every time they shoot the gun. So they decided to get rid of it, and they took it to Mocha Park and threw it into one of the canals there. We didn't find the gun.
They went and told Tyjon the gun didn't work and they needed it done immediately because they were going to leave for this family reunion. And Tyjon said, "Don't worry about it, I'll take care of it."
When was it decided how much you was going to get paid for actually shooting John?
She just told him, "I'll give you $5,000. It got to where it was getting closer and closer to July. And we were panicking because we knew that when they got up in the mountains of Georgia, Lewis was not coming back. And Karen talked to Ty again, and he said he could take care of it. And we told him it had to be done before July the 1st.
Tyjon said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." And next thing you know, John's dead at the front door.
According to family members, there was no plans to steal the baby away. This family reunion, I believe, was a concoction by Karen to help motivate Lynn to do what they needed done, because Lynn loves this baby. And this baby was going to be gone, and Lynn wasn't going to be in the baby's life anymore.
This was an enhanced premeditation, as most hired murders are. And the motivation, of course, for the two was financial. She, of course, had the insurance money that was going to become available if she got away with this. And Cooper, the trigger man, did it for money. As a state attorney, I looked at the facts and circumstances of the case and determined whether or not, under the law, the death penalty would be appropriate.
The overall strategy, Ms. Tobey's defense would have been to try to save her life. If we got something less than first-degree murder, well, that's the icing on the cake.
I probably should have shot him point blank right between the eyes.
Lynn Blake, the state's key witness, is a murderess.
Karen Toby and Tyjon Cooper were on trial for their lives, accused of being part of a murder-for-hire conspiracy that left John Cattaneo dead. A third conspirator, Lynn Blake, turned state's evidence and was set to become the prosecution's star witness. But was Lynn Blake actually the mastermind and the shooter? That's what not one, but two defense teams were about to argue.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have been selected and sworn as the jury to try the cases of State of Florida versus Tyjon Cooper and State of Florida versus Karen Toby.
The advantage for the defense is trying the case with more than one person on trial is the other defense attorneys also battling the state at the same time. So Mr. Cooper had his defense team, Karen Toby had her defense team, and so the two of you can kind of tag team the state.
Are we ready to proceed with opening statements?
Yes, Your Honor. Morning. This defendant, Karen Toby, hired this defendant, Tyjon Cooper, to murder her husband so she could get her husband out of her life and collect $500,000 of life insurance money.
Our defense is to blame Lynn Blake for the crime, that she basically used Karen as a dupe.
Lynn Blake, she pled guilty to second-degree murder. She had a plan. I will submit to you, there is evidence to prove that Lynn Blake controlled this thing. You are going to hear testimony that she was the mastermind of this plan.
Mr. Cooper's defense was that, same as ours, that Lynn Blake was the one responsible for the murder.
On behalf of Tyjon Cooper, our position is that Lynn Blake walked out of her door in a duplex, walked to the next door, which is not much longer than this jury box, had John Cattaneo summoned to the door, and shot and killed John Cattaneo. Lynn Blake, the state's key witness, is a murderess.
Lynn Blake was the star witness, so she was telling everything that she knew, but this was part of her deal with prosecutors. So to the prosecution, Lynn Blake's testimony drew the line from Karen to Tyjon.
At any point, did you hear a discussion between Ms. Toby and Mr. Cooper about the price or how much she would pay him for killing her husband?
Yes, sir. $5,000.
Did she tell him where she would get the money from?
She said that she would pay him out of the money that she would get from the insurance money.
Mr. Cooper had a different situation to defend because he was the alleged shooter. Karen was just the alleged planner. But as far as the general concept, the two defense teams were pointing the finger at Miss Lynn Blake.
You and Karen had talked a lot about when's this going to happen?
Yes, sir.
You talked to us about July the 1st being an important date, right?
Yes, sir.
July the 1st being the important date because that's when Lewis was going to be taken away.
Yes, sir.
You weren't going to stand for that, were you?
No, sir.
No way in the world are you going to let anybody take baby Louis from you.
Not if I could do anything about it, no.
So Tyjon's lawyers said he wasn't the trigger man. It was actually Lynn Blake.
And in fact, many times when you had that gun, when you admit to having the gun, you were afraid that, you even say it, that you were going to go over and shoot John Cattaneo right between his eyes.
Oh, no, sir. I never said it like that. Now you're misstating my remarks.
And when he started beating up on her, it was a good thing I threw the gun away where I did, because if I didn't, I probably would have shot him point blank right between the eyes. But I just got to the point where I said, no, I have to get rid of this gun, because if I don't, I'm going to kill John myself.
Lynn indicated that John was abusive to Karen, but during my interviews with family and friends and other people, the abuse was Karen against John. John was the kind of guy that would take a slap and a push and everything else and never react.
I am very averse to men beating on women.
You will not stand for that, will you?
No, I will not.
And you will not also stand for anybody taking baby Louis from you.
No, I won't.
Not any of the Cattaneo family.
Oh, no, I'm perfectly happy with him being with
I
them.
understand that, but you wouldn't allow any of them to take...
Not in the way that it was going to be done, no.
She was cross-examined, not once, but twice. Once by Tyjon's lawyers, and once by Karen's lawyers.
You controlled her.
No, I have never controlled Karen.
You used to store alcohol at your apartment for her.
She would go buy it and bring it to my house so that John would not find it.
Okay, and you'd let her drink there, right?
Yes, I did.
You'd keep feeding it to her, wouldn't you?
No, I did not feed it to her.
So the question is, to what extent was Karen Tobey the scheming mastermind here versus a confused, drunken, psychiatrically ill victim of circumstances?
Karen is an alcoholic. I would limit her to so much, period. John would buy her a 12-pack a day, but to that, Karen, that wasn't enough for Karen. Karen had to have more than a 12-pack a day. She would go up to the corner and get her own beer and stash it at my house.
It's in your best interest to keep her under the influence, isn't it?
No, sir.
Isn't the truth that you were the one, the mastermind of this whole deal?
No, sir.
Karen was in a very bad state at the time, barely functional, reliant on her neighbor and co-defendant, Lynn Blake, to do many things for her.
You don't think it would have been a caring thing to do to say, John, your wife's got a crazy idea, if in fact that's true?
No, at the time it didn't even dawn on me to tell John.
You don't think it would be proper to tell somebody that his life might be in danger?
It might have been proper, but at that point my concern was for Karen and for Lewis.
How could you say your concern is for Karen when you're saying that she might be committing a murder? That's your definition of caring?
Well, obviously it is.
You don't care at all about her. The only thing you cared about was Lewis. In fact, you still have plans. When you get out of here, you think you're going to get out of jail and get Louis back, don't you?
No, sir.
Ma'am, can you state your name?
Chandela Michelle Gates.
Miss Gates, where are you currently being housed?
At Volusia County Jail.
Ms. Gates was important to Karen Tobey's defense because she was able to have Lynn Blake confide in her when they were in jail together.
Did she ever talk to you about her entering into a plea agreement?
No, she just told me she was getting probation and she was gonna get out and get Karen's son and leave.
That would be Lewis?
Yes, sir. She said she was his legal godmother and she was gonna go and get him because she's getting out on probation.
Lynn had confided in her that she would get out little or no time, and then Karen would be in, Mr. Cantanio's dead, and now she's got baby Lewis.
Mr. Cooper, did you shoot John Cattaneo?
No, sir.
Karen Tobey and Tyjon Cooper were on trial for a murder-for-hire conspiracy that left John Cattaneo dead. Both defendants had a right to testify in their own defense, which is always a high-wire act in a capital murder case. One defendant declined to testify. The other dared to take the stand.
I need to advise each client on the record as to their right to testify or not testify. Ms. Tobey, you have the right to testify in your case if you wish to do so. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Karen was a loose cannon. We didn't know what could happen on the stand. Plus, we're constantly thinking in our mind about the second phase. If we put her up there during her own defense and the jury thinks she's lying, catches her in one big material lie, it's a chance they're gonna hold it against her later. And so we tried to keep her off. Plus, the truth of the matter is, Karen Tobey did not want to testify. She was afraid.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense will call Tyjon Cooper to the stand.
Tom Mott made that decision that every defense lawyer has to make in every case. That I would guess that, well, what have you got to lose?
Good afternoon, sir.
Hey, how you doing?
Could you please tell the jury your name?
My name's Tyjon Cooper.
Was there ever a time when Lynn Blake or Karen Tobey approached you about a gun?
Yes, sir, it was.
Tell the jury about that.
Me and Miss Tobey ended up in the backyard by ourselves. it came up like, do you know where I can get a gun?
What was the reason?
She was like, well, there's a lot of robberies been going on in the neighborhood, and she was scared to be home by herself with a little kid because John would be on the road with us.
What was your response to that?
No, I just shook my head, and she asked me, you know people in the hood, don't you? Like, I guess all black people know people in the hood. And I said, yeah, I know people in the hood. She said, see if you can score something down there for me.
How did it come to pass that you got them a gun?
It was this one day I was getting in my car, and they roll up, and Miss Blake, she goes, Ty, you gonna get it yet? Or have you gotten it yet? And I say, no, I ain't got it yet. She said, what's taking you so long? And that's when Miss Toby interrupted and said, well, we got $3,000 waiting on you. So my mom was like, $3,000? I say, look, meet me at the shop tomorrow after work.
Okay, and so
I went up to a little spot, and I got one. The next day I brought it to work with me. And Miss Blake pulled up in a white SUV. And I said, I got it, what's up? And she told me, oh no, not here, or not now. Meet me at the mall behind Sears an hour. I was like, okay.
Who told you that?
Miss Blake.
Was Miss Toby with her?
No.
Did you suspect that this gun was going to be used for a murder?
No.
Did you think that there was anything sinister that was going to happen other than that these ladies, or Lynn Blake in particular, was going to use this for a protection?
No offense, there's two white ladies in the suburbs of Holly Hill. I didn't think nothing like that.
He pointed the finger at Karen, but he mainly pointed it at Miss Blake.
Did you hear anything further about a gun?
Not for about 2 weeks. And so on my way back to the truck, I see Miss Blake. She goes, come here, come here. Basically, we paid $3,000 for a piece of.
What do you mean by that?
I guess the gun didn't work.
And then what happened?
That weekend, I went back up to the little place. He gave me another gun. Oh, he gave me some bullets also. I took it, put it in my car, I went back home. And I went to my backyard. I loaded the gun up. I sat down on a little lawn chair that we have back there, and I took a shot. I took a shot at a little flower pot. So at least now I know this works.
Did you hear anything more from Lynn Blake?
Yeah, later on that afternoon, I mean, she came by.
And what happened?
She got the gun from me.
Okay.
And she said, does this one work? I was like, yeah, it worked. I tested it myself.
Okay. Did you shoot John Catania?
No, sir.
Did you conspire with Lynn Blake, or tell this jury if you conspired with Lynn Blake or Karen Toby to shoot John Catania?
No, sir.
I have no further questions.
So, Mr. Cooper, if I get this straight now, what you're telling us here is you got a gun and you sold a gun to Lynn Blake and Karen Toby.
Yes, sir.
Is that right? And you went to Lucia Mall and received $2,700 for a gun.
Yes, sir.
And you'd agree that $2,700 is a pretty stiff price for a little 22, wouldn't you?
Right.
How much you pay for the gun?
$45, $50.
But you must know that something's up there. I mean, if you're $3,000 for a gun in your mind, right?
You must know something. Over.
You must know something's up here, Mr. Cooper. $3,000 for $45 .22. I mean, in your mind, you must know something's up, correct?
No, I don't know anything. I just $3,000. I was okay.
Mr. Davis, would you care to address the jury?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. John Catania is not here with us today. He was murdered in cold blood on his doorstep due to the actions of 3 people. Karen Toby, Tyjon Cooper, and Lynn Blake. 2 of those, Karen Toby and Lynn Blake, solicited Tyjon Cooper to murder John Catania. All 3 of them conspired together with each other, discussed it on numerous occasions, conspired to murder John Catania. And then on the evening of June 30th of 2004, Tyjon Cooper gunned Mr. Catania down on his doorstep. I'm asking you to return a verdict of guilty as charged in this case. Thank you.
Lynn Blake had a motive, and her motive was to get that baby. Now, the only way she can get the baby, and she doesn't deny it, is to get rid of two people. Mr. Cattaneo, we know how she did that. She hired Mr. Cooper to kill him. Now she's got to get rid of Karen. How does she do it? She's going to go to the police and set her up and accuse her of planning it and being involved. Her plan went all wrong when the state and the police decided to link her into it. But that was her plan. Get the baby by eliminating John and eliminating Karen. Karen Toby was not mentally capable of forming the intent to get involved in this conspiracy. She was drunk constantly and high on pills. We're asking that you return verdicts of not guilty.
Well, who shot John Cattaneo? The state wants you to assume that since that gun was in Ty Cooper's backyard 3 or 4 weeks before the shooting, that he therefore shot John Cattaneo. That is speculation, it is conjecture, and it is hunches, and it is far from proof beyond a reasonable doubt. What about somebody seeing Ty Cooper coming and going from that residence? Nobody did. You know why? Because Lynn Blake did it. All she had to do was take 4 or 5 steps and she's there. And she goes, pow, pow, pow. Then she goes right back in her house. Lynn Blake shot John Cattaneo because she was going to lose baby Lewis. She wouldn't stand for it. Ty Cooper is not guilty.
It's my understanding that the jury has reached a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Karen Toby, as follows.
After 17 hours of deliberation, the jury in the capital murder trials of Karen Toby and Tyjon Cooper had reached a verdict. Would the defendants be found guilty? And if so, would they be sentenced to death?
We have verdicts in 2 case numbers. Madam Clerk, will you publish the verdict in each case?
Yes, sir. State of Florida versus Karen Toby. Verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Karen Toby, as follows. Count 3, guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment. Count 4, guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder as charged. Count 5, guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder as charged. State of Florida versus Tyshon Verdell Cooper. Verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Tyshon Verdell Cooper, as follows. Count 1, guilty of manslaughter without a firearm, a lesser-included offense. Count 2, guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder as charged in the indictment.
So Cooper was actually convicted of a lesser charge, which was manslaughter without a firearm, which kind of leads us to believe that the jury thought maybe he wasn't the trigger man after all. He was involved with it, but didn't pull the trigger.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have found the defendant Karen Toby guilty of murder in the first degree. The punishment for this crime is either death or life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Final decision as to what punishment shall be imposed rests solely with the judge of this court. However, the law requires that you, the jury, render to the court an advisory sentence as to what punishment should be imposed upon the defendant.
The state attorney's office, they go first, and they present to the jury what's called aggravating circumstances.
On the day that he's murdered, she's standing with a camera, looking through the camera lens at her husband and child and Mr. Caneo's mother. And that's cold-blooded. And after taking this picture of her smiling husband with her son, this is what happened hours later. Based on the aggravating circumstance, the cold calculated method this was carried out, and the financial gain expected, What does she deserve under the law? And there is only one answer in the law, and that is clearly this defendant deserves the death penalty.
For the defense, your sole job is to try to get the jury to give her life instead of the death penalty. And then in her case, she had a lot of what's called mitigation because of her mental health condition and the abuse that she had been through.
Looking at her history, it was ominous that she's drinking at the age of 8, drinking heavily and smoking marijuana regularly by the age of 12 or 13. When you see somebody starting that young, then the risk is progression to even more intense drugs. This is someone who by the age of 15 told me was using intravenous heroin. By the age of 15, she was a junkie. This is not a good thing for a still developing brain.
I was trying to show, look at this person's life arc, humanizing her for the jury, and then reasons how she got to be in such a situation.
Now, 29, Karen was in an abusive relationship. She received a skull fracture, continued to hear voices, and suffered from depression.
She had a hospitalization in Pennsylvania where they diagnosed her as a major depressive disorder recurrent and alcohol abuse, as well as at least 4 prior suicide attempts.
We showed her to be a very flawed individual with a history of severe difficulties beginning very early in her life, a tragic life arc, and a reason to spare her from the needle.
Has the jury reached a determination on the recommendation?
Yes, we have, Your Honor.
Madam Clerk, will you publish the verdict, please?
State of Florida versus Karen Toby. Penalty phase advisory sentence. The jury advises and recommends to the court that it impose a sentence of life imprisonment upon Karen Toby without the possibility of parole.
For the defense, the life sentence with no parole is a huge win. She was relieved. You know, she smiled and hugged us, and, you know, but she also was hit with the reality that she knew she was going to spend every rest of her day locked up in a cage.
Karen and Tyjon Cooper both received life. And no, I was not satisfied with that outcome. When you kill someone for money, I mean, that just shows you how depraved you really are.
Like we told Lynn, the first person that comes clean is usually the one that gets the best deal. And Lynn actually got the best deal out of it.
In my opinion, Lynn Blake definitely got away with murder to the degree that she didn't have the longer sentence.
Just one other matter, so that we do that.
I feel sad for Mr. Cattaneo. You know, he was truly an innocent victim. The motive was greed and control. The guy didn't do anything to anyone. So I feel bad for that. And I do feel good about the fact that we avoided the death penalty for Karen.
Prison may have saved her life and extended her lifespan. Using heavy amounts of alcohol with hepatitis C is a good way to die of liver failure. So given her lifestyle, her medical problems, she will probably live substantially longer in the sober environment where she receives medical care in a prison. So perhaps that is an irony that she will live longer.
Karen Toby is now in a Washington state prison, transferred there to be closer to her family. Tyjon Cooper remains in a Florida prison. Lynn Blake served her 7.5 years in prison and was released in 2011. I'm Tamron Hall. Thank you for watching Someone They Knew.
When Ron Ron Rudin first disappeared, everyone knew something was wrong and they suspected foul play.
They found his Cadillac parked in a topless strip joint.
A burned out chest, feet away, a human skull.
Someone had to really dislike Ron in order to shoot him 4 times.
He had enemies, and he had an arsenal at home.
He said to me, I'm going to take the deal. And so that was $8 million.
Maybe Ron Rudin was murdered by someone who didn't want that transaction to take place.
Ron Rudin was a well-known fixture in old Las Vegas. He made his fortune buying and selling real estate, just as major corporations transformed the shady mob-owned casinos into massive monuments to excess. Although Ron was successful in his professional life, when it came to love, he was a bad bet, having been married 4 times. But as luck would have it, he met a beautiful Southern belle named Margaret and decided to play the odds one more time.
Ron Rudin came out to Las Vegas to make a fortune in real estate, and he did that. He was very driven. Las Vegas was a different animal then. The mob ran the town. The corporations hadn't come in yet. And he did well. He did very well.
Ron was an interesting man. He was a pioneer, so to speak, in Las Vegas. He was very well known in Las Vegas as a realtor.
Ron Rudin was a cutthroat businessman. He had made millions in the Las Vegas real estate market. He was investing in real estate when the boom started in Las Vegas.
He was really kind of a sleazy businessman. He would buy and sell houses, and then he would foreclose on, like he would sell you a house and carry the paper, and then as you missed a payment, man, he was there to take it back. So he had a lot of enemies that way. He was not an above-board business person.
He was handsome by most people's standards, and he was a womanizer. He loved the love game. Margaret didn't come into the picture till, you know, a decade later or so, and she came in very quietly.
Margaret Rudin is a very beautiful woman, very well kept. It was part of her persona back then. I mean, anyone who saw Margaret would just automatically be, wow, what an elegant woman.
She married, had a couple of kids. That marriage didn't work out. And then she married several other times. And then for a fresh start, you know, she came out to Las Vegas.
Margaret Rudin met Ron at a church, at a Christian church, and they hit it off.
He came over immediately after the service, and he said, how would you like to go to the Las Vegas Country Club with me for lunch? Which was a way of bragging, you know, because it's a private club. I said, no, I'm not going. I'm not interested. Anyway, he said, I'll fix that. And he went over and got the minister. And he said, would you tell her I'm okay, that I'm a member here? And the minister said to me, you've got my blessings.
She got the good Ron version. He wooed her, he courted her. She had the Cinderella syndrome. She thought she had found her Prince Charming.
My sister knew because she was in real estate here. And she said, Margaret, I've heard some bad things about him. And I said, well, I'm not going to marry him. 6 weeks later, I married him.
Well, pretty soon after they married, after he got the I do's and the papers signed, she realized he had a drinking problem. The good Ron would turn into the bad Ron.
We had an up and down marriage at first, but the longer I was married to him, the more I knew him. He had a really good side. He helped a lot of people. He usually wanted something in return, but he had a good heart.
Ron Rudin had a lot of enemies in town because, you know, you buy up land and some other person wants the land, and there could be a lot of sharp deals made. And
one of the things that hovered over Ron Rudin his entire business career was rumors of connections to the mafia. He, like a lot of business people in Las Vegas, dealt with the mafia and had connections to people who you and I might not have connections to. Another thing about Ron Rudin was he was a gun nut. He was consumed with guns.
He had enemies, and he had an arsenal at home. Why would your average guy need 1,000 guns at home? Now, he was a gun dealer, but come on. You're gonna keep 1,000 guns at home in a private collection? Why you need all that firepower?
He was heavily invested in Lee Canyon, which is a very gorgeous property in the area of Mount Charleston. That's about 45, 50 minutes northwest of Las Vegas.
He sold it to a company called Olympia down in, I think, in Phoenix. And he said to me, when they give me $40,000 an acre, I'm gonna take the deal. And they did. And so that was $8 million. And he disappeared on Monday morning. When I got home, he wasn't there. He was supposed to have signed the deal with Olympia on Wednesday.
The proposed transfer of land and exchange of money never happened after Ron Rudin disappeared. So that really fueled speculation that maybe Ron Rudin was murdered by someone who didn't want that transaction to take place.
They said, we found your husband dead. He'd been shot.
A hiker found human remains in a burned-out chest.
To me, that's as staged as it could be. That had mob written all over it.
When Las Vegas businessman Ron Rudin went missing on December 20th, 1994, there was plenty of speculation to go around. There were a lot of rumors that Ron had more than a few enemies. As news of his disappearance spread, locals wondered if it could be related to Ron's business dealings or maybe even his alleged mob ties. But without any actual evidence of foul play, Ron's absence was a total mystery.
When Ron Rudin first disappeared, everyone knew something was wrong and they suspected foul play. The reason for this is Ron Rudin was a very meticulous businessman, hands-on guy, had to be involved in everything, and the fact that he didn't show up for work caused a lot of concern for people.
Margaret Rudin was getting to be a suspect because she didn't report her husband missing right away. Margaret had to be told by friends, hey, you know where Ron is? Did you report it? And she says, no, I didn't report it. That was suspicious to the police officers.
We reported him on the 20th. I had called, and I talked to a man. I wish I'd have got his name, but I didn't. On the morning that he didn't come back at Metro, and he said, oh, men do that all the time. Men do that. We don't even check them out until they're 48 hours. You know, he said, call me back after 48 hours.
I think she was kind of low-hanging fruit for Metro detectives who didn't want to really dig into this case, because I think to really solve this case at the time, it was going to take a lot of work. And Margaret was there. Maybe she didn't react the way they thought she should have reacted, you know, when he was gone.
Now, because he was very successful and he was a shrewd businessman, he had this directive. It says, in the event that I die under any suspicious circumstances, it is to totally be investigated, and the people who are closest to me, such as the trustees and Margaret, are to be investigated. Well, immediately, the trustees shut Margaret down. They left her with nothing.
Within 10 days, after Ron disappeared, they shut off all bank accounts, all credit cards, told me they were going to repossess the car. They shut off all utilities that had been paid through the business. They even shut off newspapers.
When Ron Rudin disappeared, it went for a period of months where no one really knew what happened to him.
They found his Cadillac. He always had a black Cadillac. They found his Cadillac parked in a topless strip joint.
They found his car at the Crazy Horse 2 Saloon, which was a mobbed-up joint. And when they found the car there was like 4 sets of footprints in there.
And they didn't know why that was, so they had no idea why his car was parked there.
The investigation went on for months with very few developments until a hiker found human remains in a burned-out chest, a trunk that was near Lake Mojave. When the police examined that crime scene, they found a bracelet in diamonds that said Ron. The remains were those of Ron Rudin. A forensic examination of the remains found that he had been shot in the head at close range.
When I look at it, and the way they found the skull, and the way they found the fire, and the way they found the evidence out there, to me, that's as staged as it could be. That had mob written all over it. They were sending a signal.
The police came to my door, and my heart sank because I knew. And they said, "We found your husband dead. He'd been shot." They did tell me he'd been shot, but they didn't tell me he'd been burned.
Nelson's Landing, a remote area 40 miles from Las Vegas near Lake Mojave. A burned-out chest, feet away, a human skull. And another clue, a distinct custom-made bracelet spelling out R-O-N. Dental records would confirm it was the remains of Ron Rudin.
They make a big deal about the fact when they went to her house to notify her that they found Ron's body, that she didn't seem like the grieving widow. Well, hell, by that time, he'd been gone for almost 6 weeks, and no one had been using his credit cards or his money or anything. They found his car at the mobbed-up strip club over there. She didn't think he was coming home.
Augustine Lovato was a handyman who occasionally worked for Margaret Rudin, and he went to the authorities and told this incredible story that Margaret had hired him to dispose of some very valuable evidence in her bedroom, that there was a mattress that was covered in blood, carpet, and that there was also, he told this bizarre account of actually blood bubbling in a bathtub.
This was 2 weeks after the seasoned Metro detectives came in. The missing persons guys had got on their hands and knees and looked under the bed. They didn't see any big stains. They didn't see flecks of blood on the ceilings or anything.
And a remarkable sort of thing, some skin divers apparently out at Lake Mead had found a weapon out there in the lake, and they brought it in, and it was apparently turned into the police, and lo and behold, they're claiming it was a match to Ron Rudin's weapon that had been reported, I believe, stolen in the past.
It wasn't too long after that she took off. She knew she wasn't going to get any money. Why stick around? They hadn't indicted her, you know, so she left.
Okay, I didn't flee. I left because my attorney took all the money that I had got from the estate. I decided I'm leaving. I can't take this place. I can't take all the underhanded, dirty things that are going on.
They indicted her, you know, after the fact that she was gone, and then the big manhunt happened.
There was a period of time where she was staying in a seedy hotel down in Arizona.
She had to reinvent herself to stay ahead of the cops.
It would take authorities in Clark County, Nevada, more than 2 years to obtain an indictment in the murder of Las Vegas businessman Ron Rudin. That indictment was against his 5th wife, Margaret. The only problem is that Margaret had left Las Vegas more than a year before. What ensued was a nationwide manhunt to find her.
When the grand jury proceedings were going on, people talk about Margaret ran out of town. She didn't run out of town for like 2.5 years. And when she left town, she wasn't indicted. She could do whatever she wanted.
There was a period of time where she was staying in a kind of seedy hotel down in Arizona in the Phoenix area. And this case received a lot of publicity.
America's Most Wanted did a piece on the murder of Ron Rudin, and somebody recognized her. They called the police. The police came, interviewed her. She had, of course, identification of somebody else. Police had a suspicion that she was Margaret Rudin, but the next day they tried to go back there. and she went on the lam again. So she was on the lam from Phoenix. Then I heard she went to Mexico for a while.
When she was in Mexico, I guess she had met someone else who was evading arrest. And she kind of learned some good tips on, you know, kind of how to stay ahead of the cops. She had to reinvent herself to stay ahead of it and hopes possibly that, you know, that something else would break that would deter them.
She has led police through the states of Arizona, Illinois, and Mexico. She came to Revere in December of 1998, according to the Massachusetts State Police.
There was a man I had met in Mexico who was only my friend. And he was having hip surgery and 2 knee surgeries, so he asked me if I'd come to Boston area and help take care of him because he was in a 2nd floor apartment and he needed help. So I told him everything. I said, I want you to know what you might be getting yourself in for.
2 weeks ago, Joe Lundergan of Revere made People magazine. Today, he made the People's Court, charged with knowingly giving harbor to a fugitive wanted on the charge of murder.
And we have probable cause to believe that he knew that she was wanted in Las Vegas for murder.
I said, I am going to eventually be caught. But it was giving me more and more time to deal with putting the things in order, putting them in place, checking out things, finding out things I didn't know. And I had some good people helping me in the background.
She slipped up. What she did was she liked the grandchildren a lot. And she used to send packages, but she didn't want to send them directly, so she sent them through an intermediary, I believe in St. George, Utah. And the police knew about this, and her address was on one of the packages, and they knew that she was in Revere, Massachusetts.
Margaret Rudin might have looked attractive in any hair color, and she apparently tried them all after she fled from Las Vegas in 1997. She was wearing the black wig when the State Police Fugitive Squad found her in her bathroom Friday night. Margaret Rudin had a propensity for changing her hair colors, her name, she had at least 4, and her husband's. Of those, she had 5. And she's accused of murdering number 5, a Las Vegas multimillionaire.
When Margaret Rudin was returned to Las Vegas to face murder charges, this was not an airtight case. And so the authorities had repeatedly tendered a plea agreement to her that would have allowed her to plead guilty to this and do a minimum amount of time and walk away from it.
I talked it over with my mother. She wanted me to take it, and I said, Mom, I can't, because I have to admit I'm guilty, and I'm not guilty, so I'm not going to take it.
Interestingly, she refused all those offers. Margaret repeatedly told them that she didn't do this and that, she wanted to go before a jury because she felt very strongly that she would be acquitted.
If she had a cop to that just for a lesser plea so that she could have been freed, I think that would have stuck in her craw, so to speak, and she might not could have lived with that.
She would be looking at roughly 2.5 years. I strongly encouraged her to take it because God gives you only so many years on this earth. And she said no. She was adamant that she wouldn't do it.
They told me, if you will accept it now, you can walk now. And I should have.
It was the worst opening statement that I've ever experienced in my life.
No one watching that could feel comfortable for Margaret at that point.
Repeatedly, Judge Bonaventure had to intervene and say, hey, what's going on here? What are you talking about?
Margaret Rudin had spent almost 2 years in jail by the time her trial started in 2001. Clark County prosecutors knew their case had some major holes in it, so they repeatedly offered Margaret very generous plea deals in exchange for her confession for the murder of her husband, Ron. Margaret continued to maintain her innocence and refused to cut a deal, opting instead to take her chances at trial.
Now we're going to hear
opening statements from the counsel, all right? The opening statement on behalf of the state?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Owens?
Now, the purpose of the opening statement is to give you sort of an orientation or framework so that as you see the actual evidence in this case, you'll be able to kind of know where you're at and not get lost. It's really important in a case like this because in this particular case, we're talking about the span of time of nearly 13 years and literally hundreds of pieces of evidence and photograph.
Michael Amador was a young district attorney also, and he went into private practice. Seemed like a nice young man. I knew him as a judge. He appeared in front of me. But something happened to Michael Amador. It was the worst opening statement that I've ever experienced in my life.
Margaret, Tom, Michael, gentlemen. This is a great day. In a lot of different ways. This is a great day for me. This is a culmination of a career.
I'd never been arrested in my life, not even for a traffic accident or anything, nothing. Michael Amador came to me. He'd done a lot of homework. He knew what he was talking about when he came in. I didn't think he was so bad as he was. But he probably was the biggest mistake I ever made in my life because I believed him.
If you want to know an opinion about me, I guarantee you'll find some. Different from different people. Not many people know me. I could be a wonderful, caring father, coaching soccer and basketball and helping kids with homework and doing all those things I did with my kids as they were growing up. I was young, the first time I got married. When I was a green 25-year-old kid who came here to crush crime and make the world safe for democracy. You better believe that's what I thought.
It was, by all accounts, probably one of the worst opening statements in the history of courts. And I'm not exaggerating. It was all over the map. It was incoherent. Something was wrong. And repeatedly, Judge Bonaventure had to intervene and say, hey, what's going on here? What are you talking about?
All right, Mr. Amador, I think I'm ornery all the time. This is really an opening statement. Right? And I think that I don't know if the DAs want to object or not. They've been very polite, I think.
No one watching that could feel comfortable for Margaret at that point. She didn't realize how bad it was while she was sitting there, but I've watched the video of that opening statement, and what pains me is seeing Margaret there, and I've always thought, what must she be thinking, having to witness this? And it's her life that's on the line. It's no one else's. Everyone else got to go do their thing, but she paid the price for this.
We've been here for 35 minutes. You can maybe save that for closing, but an opening statement is just like a roadmap to tend to show what the evidence will show. And you're really, for 35 minutes now, I didn't mind 5, 10, 15 minutes, but I would wish, in all respect, that you would just get to what the evidence, in your opinion, will tend to show, and we'll move on, all right? I'm obligated as a judge to do that, so. I took it upon myself to call everybody in chambers and say, you know, Mr. Amador, this might be a little above your head here. Let me help you. Let me get some lawyers involved with this. So I had top-notch attorneys appointed at county expense, Tom Patero, John Marmot, to help him out and get the case moving.
Mr. Rudin disappeared, and then at some point in time, they'd found a skull out in the middle of the desert.
And you say you find a skull. Tell me actually what it is, how you see it, and what happens.
I walked past it. I thought my friends were playing a joke on me, and they said, there's a human skull. And I turned around, and they had the flashlight on it, on the skull, and we knew that it was a real human skull, and it wasn't a joke.
Once you identify that it's a real human skull, what is it that you do?
We go up the trail to Steve's vehicle, drive back to Las Vegas, and call Las Vegas Police Department.
I was told that there was an area of a burned area, and there seemed to be remains of a body. So we proceeded to investigate this scene and approach. First thing we would do is do photography. This is a close-up view of that charred pit. And these long, slender items are metal strips that I recovered from this fire pit.
You said that other than the metal long pieces, you also saw evidence of some other items in there.
Yes, there's smaller items. There's pieces of wood, smaller metal pieces. I recovered a latch. And there were white, charred pieces, what appeared to be burned pieces of bone.
In my opinion, Ron Rudin died as a result of multiple gunshot wounds to the head.
Then they said that the trunk that the charred remains were found in was a trunk that had come from her antique store.
Can you describe the trunk for the jury here?
It was approximately, I'll say, 3 feet across, 2.5 feet wide, 2.5 feet long.
They said a trunk was missing from my shop. I never had a trunk in that shop. Several more people testified there was no trunk in that shop.
A diver at Lake Mead found a firearm wrapped in plastic at the bottom of the lake. Forensic examination found that this was, in fact, Ron Rudin's missing weapon.
Do you recognize State's Exhibit 69?
Yes, sir.
And how is it you recognize State's Exhibit 69?
It's a Ruger handgun, 22 caliber, inside the same bags with the magazine laid next to it. Same form as I found it back then.
I continued to pursue a comparison of those bullets and eventually came to the conclusion that the bullets from Ron Rudin were fired from the Ruger pistol, which I'd examined months before.
So it was clear to the police that someone had used this gun to kill Ron, wrapped it in plastic, and disposed of it at the bottom of the lake. And the police were very resolute in saying that there's only 2 people that would have had access to this gun, Ron and Margaret Rudin.
And their theory was, obviously, that Margaret had killed Ron for some financial gain.
To stuff him in a trunk, load him in a van or some kind of vehicle, along with the gasoline it would take to burn up his body and to drive him out to Nelson's Landing, unload him, pour all the gas out, burn him up. I mean, it's just inconceivable that Margaret could have done that.
This was never about a reward. This was about a man that was dead and that people loved him and he was missing.
You know, you didn't know whether to believe him or not, but it was very important testimony because it linked her to the disposal of evidence.
After delivering a disastrous opening statement, Margaret Rudin's defense team, led by Michael Amador, are in the unfortunate position of having to win back the jury. And although there is no hard evidence linking Margaret to the murder of her husband, Ron, the prosecution believes they have enough witnesses to build a circumstantial case that will convince jurors to convict.
Now, what was the condition of the carpet in the 9 by 12 area that you were now going to cut out?
Well, in this area, on this side, when I started cutting through it, it was hard.
It was reported from a young man, Augustine Lovato, that right after Ron was missing, she hired him to do some remodeling. She wanted to remodel the bedroom into an office.
There was like something had been spilt in that area or something. It was hard, and there was like a dark brown hard substance, and when I cut through with the utility knife, stuff was flicking off it and spraying me on my face or sticking to my skin.
Augustine Lovato, he was kind of this nebulous guy who, you didn't know what to make of him. You know, you didn't know whether to believe him or not, but it was very important testimony because it linked her to the disposal of evidence.
That's just preposterous, number one. So this whole thing astonishes me. He saw an ad in the paper offering $25,000 reward, and then to come in and say, hey, I saw red liquid bubbling up from the drain. I saw this crusty blood-stained carpets after the detectives had been in there looking at it. So that's the kind of credibility issues that we would have in this case.
This was never about a reward. This was about a man that was dead and that people loved him and he was missing.
Well, the fact is that you and your mother were living in an apartment that didn't even have furniture, correct?
Correct.
You people were broke, correct?
Correct. That's why I was
You were
looking for a job.
desperate for money, correct?
Judge, if you can answer the question, please, I object.
Yeah, please, let the witness answer.
The trustees put up the reward. And then this so-called handyman who said he was in the house and saw and did all of this, he's the one that collected the $25,000. The trustees end up paying him.
Showtime. You would just come over here, Mr. Marmot. And right now I'm going to shoot you. Waited years.
The state's theory was that he was killed in that bed, and we did not believe that that was a sustainable theory.
The shooter would have to be directly over on top of it.
So now the shooter is going to be up here, shooting 3 shots in the back of the head?
Well, yeah, I think so, because if that blood came from the entry wounds in the back of the head, then they have to come there directly. They're not going to take a circuitous route.
These wounds are here. It's going to be coming this way. You got to get it so it's perpendicular, Dr. Thornton. Could you move his head more?
Counsel's leading. He's running the whole demonstration.
Well, Your Honor, to get to the demonstration, I didn't have to do that.
Well, I don't think you do. Don't lead the witness. You could do it some other way. Just ask him how it could be done. Don't lead him. The district attorney's office vehemently objected to this because the lawyers were getting on it, jumping on the bed and saying, see, ladies and gentlemen, jury, it couldn't have happened this way. Well, they're testifying, and you can't do that. I agreed with the state. Eventually, I excluded the bedroom set, didn't allow them to use it in front of the jury.
I would move for a mistrial on her behalf. We haven't talked to enough people, and even the best investigators in the state simply don't have enough time in the day to get completely prepared. If the court grants my motion, I will also be moving to withdraw as attorney of record on behalf of Margaret Rudin.
A lot of people felt he should have got a mistrial. You know, that this thing had spiraled off the rails, so to speak. People were questioning whether Margaret was getting an adequate defense.
State your full name for the record.
Eugene Warner.
You also go by the name of Yehuda Sharon?
Yes, I do.
And have you, in fact, gone by the name Yehuda Sharon in depositions associated with this case?
Yes, I did.
Yehuda Sharon was a very close friend of Margaret's. He's a former Israeli intelligence officer. And as the police investigation focused in on Margaret, the police started to suspect that Margaret and Yehuda were having an affair.
Were you ever romantically involved with Margaret Rudin?
No, I was not.
Why did you help her?
Because I basically was trying to help myself getting out of the situation. Basically, I find myself confronting the police when the police lie and the police give false information to newspaper and to other media. And it just happened that in that circumstances, Margaret Rudin and I were in the same boat. So helping myself, naturally, it helped her.
So the police came up with this theory, never proven, that Yehuda had helped Margaret dispose of the body.
Did you kill Ron Rudin?
No, I did not.
Did you help kill Ron Rudin?
No, I did not.
Did you help dispose of his body?
No, I did not.
Did you go up to Nelson's Landing in December of 1994?
No, I did not.
In any kind of car?
I did not.
And the one person they thought was in cahoots with her was Yehuda Sharon. He went to court in the grand jury and then later the trial and said he wasn't going to testify. The DA's office went and got an order from a judge giving him immunity, which meant that Yehuda Sharon could have admitted to everything if he was involved and would have walked away a free man. And he walked in there and said, I don't know anything about any murder. I wasn't involved in any murder. So, I mean, that was as close as they ever came to finding a partner.
Ms. Cantrell, you are the sister of Margaret Rudin, is that correct?
Yes, I am. Her sister gave damning testimony, but they had a damned relationship from small children.
Now, do you and Margaret talk about what has now transpired between she and Detective Janice?
Yes.
And what is it that Margaret says?
She said, you know how you will tell what you know if you're not careful. And I said, yes.
And she said that's why I made a point of going back over to the detective, because I had caught myself talking about him in the past tense to the detective earlier.
And when she now tells you about catching herself talking about the past tense versus present tense, what is it that you say?
I said, I hope that doesn't mean that you know something.
And what did Margaret respond?
She said, I don't give a.
We have a dilemma of truth and a dilemma of proof, a dilemma of facts and a dilemma of evidence.
This was a case where she didn't do herself any favors by fleeing.
Margaret Rudin's excruciating 6-week trial was marked by mistakes and mayhem. She asked for and was denied a mistrial due to the poor representation provided to her by her attorney, Michael Amador. Margaret's fate rests in the hands of the jury, who have to decide whether circumstantial evidence the state has presented is proof of her guilt.
There are facts and circumstances that link Margaret Rudin to Ron Rudin's violence, death. The facts and circumstances also would indicate that someone had to have malice for Ron. Someone had to really dislike Ron in order to shoot him 4 times. Donna talked to Margaret about the fact, well, gee, if Ron's so difficult, if it's so terrible at home, I thought you were going to divorce him. She said to me, he's not in good health. He can't even walk without being out of breath. And I think I'll wait. Wait for what? Wait for him to die? Did Margaret grow impatient? I would submit to you that she did.
This is not an easy trial for anyone that was involved in it, but especially it wasn't easy for Margaret Rudin. Once again, the attorneys go home, the judges go home. The question is, does the defendant go home with you?
We have a dilemma of truth and a dilemma of proof, a dilemma of facts and a dilemma of evidence. Because if, in fact, that was where this horrific deed took place, within 3 days, a member of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department was in that room searching it with the consent of Margaret Rudin. And he did not see any of the things that the state has told you over and over must have been there. Margaret Rudin is not guilty because the evidence says it.
My gut told me she was going to be convicted. This was a case where she didn't do herself any favors by fleeing, and that created a lot of suspicion in the eyes of the public, and I also think in the eyes of the jury.
All right, have you selected a foreperson? Who's the foreperson? Would you please stand up, sir? Ms. Rudin, will you stand up, please? Have you arrived at a verdict?
Yes, sir, we have.
Hand the verdicts to the bailiff. Please read the verdict aloud, starting from the very top on down.
As to count 1, murder with the use of a deadly weapon, we find the defendant guilty.
Dated, signed?
It is dated the 2nd day of May, 2001.
And those fateful words that he used in his opening, "This is the greatest day of my life," came back to haunt us in that jury verdict when the foreman, after the guilty verdict, I believe he used that same phrase when he spoke to the media.
I submit to you that today, May the 2nd, 2 months later, that this is a great day. Ronald Rudin, his family, and the people of the great state of Nevada can comfort in the fact that justice was served today.
The focus should have been on Margaret Rudin and her defense, and unfortunately at times it got lost.
The trial itself was very convoluted, you know. I mean, it was difficult for anyone to follow. And so it was very difficult for them to pull together a defense. I think that because of the particular problem in the interaction between one of the attorneys, my attorneys, and the judge, that was another complication and a problem.
As for Mr. Rudin and your marriage to him, I only hope that these words of Robert Ingersoll pacify his pain and the people that loved Ron Rudin. I would rather live and love where death is king than have eternal life where love is not.
In my opinion now, knowing all I know, I did not get a fair trial. Many things were covered up. The truth is, even in trial, some of the things that were very, very vital, the judge just shushed it away. You know, it didn't have importance to him.
Regardless of your claims to the contrary, the jury has spoken and has found you guilty of first-degree murder. Therefore, taking into consideration the Department of Parole and Probation pre-sentence report, the court sentences you to life imprisonment in the Nevada Department of Corrections with the possibility of parole. You will not be eligible until you have served at least 20 years.
The truth is, I didn't kill him. I don't think anybody knows the truth of Ron's death. Nobody's tried to really find that part out.
She maintained her innocence the whole time, even after she was convicted and doing time in Florence McClure Women's Correctional Facility. She had done about 5 years. And they basically told her, if you'll just change your plea, we will release you with time served and you will be out of here. You can go. She told them no. She says, I'm innocent. I'm going to prove I'm innocent.
I didn't do it. You know, your mind starts saying, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. How could this have happened? I didn't, you know? And especially when everybody was saying the state did not present a case against you. And then to find that they did, or the 12 people believed they did, that was, I think, a point when you're disbelieving and you're numb. You're just totally numb.
If it wasn't for bad luck, Margaret Rudin wouldn't have any. I believe anything that happened broke against her, and that to me, just as a person, isn't fair.
I interviewed her the day she was released from prison. She's on parole, but she stuck to the same story. It was 20 years later, and she had stuck to the same story.
The joy of being released from prison is tempered by the fact that Margaret Rudin is innocent and she did not murder her husband, Ron Rudin. I think it's important to clear her name, and it's also important for people to know the justice system does fail. This could happen to anybody.
I don't want to clear my name for myself. I want to do it for my family. They still believe in me. That's what I want people to listen, investigate if need be, study the system a little bit, and help change it.
After serving out her 20-year sentence, Margaret Rudin was released from Florence McClure Correctional Center on January 10, 2020. Although she is a free woman, Margaret and her attorney, Greg Mullinex, are determined to get a new trial and clear her name. I'm Tamron Hall. Thank you for watching Someone They Knew.
Penny was the type of woman who wanted the perfect marriage.
He looks for his wife, doesn't see her anywhere, and then comes into the family room and sees Penny on the ground in a pool of blood by her piano.
The police are thinking it's a robbery because there's some jewelry missing. There's a bunch of jewelry in the bathtub, and some things are kind of awry and jumbled.
It was a killing and an obliteration of somebody.
Penny and Roger Skaggs were pillars of the community in Austin, Texas. Roger was a very successful and respected businessman, and Penny was a devoted wife and mother. Both were leaders in their local church, and Penny even counseled women on how to improve their marriages. So it was a shock to everyone when on March 6, 1996, their picture-perfect life together suddenly came to a violent and tragic end.
Penny and Roger Skaggs were a very all-American family, religious couple, and they lived in Austin, Texas in the 80s and 90s.
They met in college, and then he was in the Air Force for 10 years. Penny was the type of woman who wanted the perfect marriage. She wanted a godly marriage. She wanted a godly man, and she was just dead set on being the perfect wife.
They lived in a very upscale part of Austin in a really expensive house, which was kind of like their dream house.
A lot of their social activities were centered around the church. I think both of them were very involved almost on a daily basis with some church activity.
Penny also hosted a Christian course called Creative Counterpart at her home, where she would kind of counsel these younger women on traditional views and values of marriage. And Roger, he would host a Sunday school class with his wife, as well as a Bible study. Good Christian family.
Penny wanted to honor Roger. She loved him. She loved him deeply.
Penny was very devoted and dedicated to Roger as he was to her.
She would do anything to please Roger because she felt that was her role, and she truly loved that man.
Roger is a pillar of the business community, and he kind of bought into this company called APS. It was kind of like a startup, we would call it nowadays. He was with the Ross Perot Company and had already made a lot of money, and apparently he made even more money with his APS place, with stock options and all that.
In March 6th of 1996 was a regular day. Roger had gotten up and had gone to work. Penny stayed home.
Roger would be preparing to have a massive board of directors meeting the next day. So he's gonna be working overtime, and so he talks to Penny on the phone, and she says, hey, you know what, why don't you come home for a little bit, have some dinner, relax for a second, and then you can go back, finish up whatever you need for the next day.
This is basically the way they did things. Roger would come home for an early dinner, and generally about 5:30. Then after that, he left 6:30, 7, went back to his office.
As soon as he gets home from the office, around a little before 9, he walks in through the garage. He looks for his wife, doesn't see her anywhere, and then comes into the family room and sees Penny on the ground in a pool of blood by her piano.
At some point, she was playing the piano, which she often did, and someone came up from behind and struck her several times in the head, and then subsequent to that, stabbed her several times.
In the wake of seeing his wife bloody on the floor, Roger grabs the phone and actually calls his neighbor, Diana Coleman.
He said something about having looked for Penny and that he had found her lying in a pool of blood.
And she says, well, get off the phone, call the police, I'll be right over. And so he calls Austin Police Department.
I recall something about an individual finding a body inside a residence, and the subject wasn't breathing, and there was blood around the body.
The police are thinking it's a robbery because there's some jewelry missing. There's a bunch of jewelry in the bathtub, and some things are kind of awry and jumbled.
And then upon entering the master bedroom, on the floor, you could see like somebody had taken the drawers out of a jewelry box and thrown them on the floor.
This was a neighborhood that I don't think there's ever been a murder in that neighborhood, either prior to or afterwards. All very expensive homes, all executives and professionals.
There was a sense of terror initially, people wanting to lock doors and being terribly afraid, and it was just almost a revulsion to some kind of evil.
Originally, he is not a suspect.
In just a couple of weeks, we will have been married 35 years.
Roger didn't exactly act how you would expect a grieving husband to do.
It's just like I'm a free bird now.
On the night of March 6, 1996, Austin businessman Roger Skaggs came home from work to find Penny, his wife of over 30 years, brutally murdered in their suburban home. The attack was so vicious that she was almost unrecognizable. Evidence at the scene suggested that Penny had been the victim of an apparent home invasion robbery gone wrong.
Penny Skaggs did have a number of injuries.
He attacked her by coming up behind her. He had a lead pipe. First blow, we believe, was right across the right side of her face.
She had 7 blunt force injuries to her skull, head, and face.
Then he used a knife. He cut her throat with the knife. He stabbed her through and through twice with the knife. It was a most shocking kind of attack with such vengeance. And I've been a prosecutor in a long time. I've seen some really bad stuff, but it was a killing and an obliteration of somebody.
The investigation into Roger and Penny Skaggs initially started with interrogating Roger himself.
What happened this evening? So I came home from work for dinner, 5:30, 6 o'clock or so.
Brought him down to the police station. Sergeant Detective David Carter was the one who interrogated him.
I called her and said, I'm not going to be able to finish. It's going to take me a couple more hours. She said, why don't you come home, let's have dinner, and you relax a little bit, and you go back and finish. And so I said, okay.
According to him, they had dinner, and then he stayed a little bit and then went back to the office. He definitely acted according to his normal behavior. He's coming home for dinner. He's going back up to the office. He went up there and just went right back to work.
When you left the office, did you just go straight home? Okay.
His alibi at the time of the murder was that he was at the office. He had some digital record of it showing on his hard drive that he had printed some documents, things like that, as well as Vanessa Ferguson, a fellow associate, would corroborate his alibi of him being at the office as well.
Roger's at the office. He's working overtime. He says Vanessa is there working. So later that evening, he goes home and he finds Penny brutally murdered.
Looked in the living room and I could see her head. So I panicked, of course, and ran in there and then came to an immediate stop because it was not even. It's really horrible. She just laying in blood, and her face was all bloated and bruised, and blood running out of her ear, or wasn't running, it was there, and you know, her head was in blood.
Originally, he is not a suspect, but for some reason, the police think that Roger now is suspicious.
And what I need to understand is the relationship between you and your wife. In just a couple of weeks, we will have been married 35 years. And, we've done everything together all our life, both active in the church, and we've had a wonderful relationship.
Roger didn't exactly act how you would expect a grieving husband to do. Instead of buying 2 plots at the funeral home, one for Penny and one for him, as when he passed away, he only bought 1. And kind of implying, I don't want to be buried next to my wife of 35 years. He also didn't want to attend her burial initially.
When Roger got there, he had this flamboyant red, white, and blue leather jacket with an eagle on the back of it. At the very least, you could say that's inappropriate, right? But it's just like, I'm a free bird now. He's free. And he told a person who said, well, you know, you shouldn't make any big decisions the first year after you lose a spouse. And he went, well, I could be married 2 or 3 times in a year. Just making a joke out of it. Within days, literally, of her death, he's telling people that he might get remarried. He shined his lights, and they went over and panned the area, and he saw that there were 2 dumpsters down there. And near the bottom, there was a trash bag that was not like the other trash bags.
In the wake of Penny Skaggs' tragic death, Roger, her husband of over 30 years, displayed very unusual behavior. He seemingly shows little emotion when it comes to the loss of his wife, but he does have an alibi for the night of the murder. As detectives continue to search for clues, they make a dramatic discovery that will change the course of their investigation.
It seemed to be a very happy marriage. We did things with them as a couple and visited their home quite often, and they were always very loving and concerned with each other.
He was just our normal brother-in-law as far as we were concerned. There was nothing that was out of the ordinary or necessarily extraordinary about him. He was just a member of their family.
In some ways, that very rigid religious atmosphere, it kind of worked because she wanted to be the housewife par excellence and he wanted to be the big deal businessman guy. But the problem is when you get into that kind of structure, it's very difficult to adhere to everything in the structure. And unfortunately, part of the structure was supposed to be they're not going to have extramarital affairs.
Well, Vanessa Ferguson was at one time, I believe, an employee of Roger Skaggs, and later they commenced to have an affair, and she was very integral to the case.
She was a secretary at his office, and they had developed an affair, been going, you know, surreptitiously for a long time.
We rationalized all of her behavior, and it never occurred to us that there was anything going on like there was.
In December of 1995, we were well convinced that there was something drastically wrong.
I think that a lot of people will ask, why don't these guys get a divorce?
First, Penny would never tolerate such a thing. It was totally against all of her religious beliefs.
She wanted to honor him, respect him. She wanted to hold him up to the community because divorce was against everything she believed in.
Roger, it would destroy his career because he had such a stellar reputation with his clients.
She was very tense, and she was very, in Roger's presence, she was very unhappy. And we knew she was not happy.
In the murder of Penny Skaggs, there were no other potential suspects.
Our theory of the case was that Roger went to the garage, got the utensils, the lead pipe, the knives. He just came back in really slowly and didn't make any sound until he got right up to her.
The guy was enraged. You know, he's repressing his feelings, repressing his feelings, repressing his feelings, repressing his feelings. And I think he is getting further and further away from her to the point where she is just an object out there. She is basically of no use to me. She's the thing that's stopping me from really being myself.
In line with his desire to kind of present this as a burglary, he took her jewelry off, and then he went into the bathroom where the costume jewelry was and wanted to make it look like a burglary. And so he just emptied all the costume jewelry in the tub. looks like, without even going through it.
He changes his clothes into something a little more comfortable and then heads back to the office around 7:15.
And he claims that the only other person that was there happened to be the person he's having sex with.
The investigation into Roger and Penny Skaggs really was quick. It was about a week-long investigation, and they sort of backtracked. If he had done it, where would he go? What is in close proximity to the home, which was his office, and they were able to track down evidence from there.
The chief detective thought that he was a logical person to have done it, and if he did it, when they noticed that things had been taken from the house, they would have been discarded somewhere between the home and his office, which was not terribly far from there.
David Carter, who was a homicide detective, brilliant, brilliant move. And this was like at 3 o'clock in the morning. He went to Roger Skaggs' house, and then he wanted to see how far it was to get to his office and trying to nail down the timeline. As he pulled around there, he shined his lights, and they went over and panned the area, and he saw that there were 2 dumpsters down there, and that they had a lot of stuff in them. So he was going, well, you know, it doesn't seem like someone would put something in a dumpster on their own property, right? But for him to do things right, those dumpsters needed to be impounded.
And they decided to examine the contents of the dumpsters, so they took them to a warehouse, and they emptied the dumpsters on the ground, and they were pretty filled with debris.
And near the bottom, there was a trash bag that was not like the other trash bags. And he lifted it up far enough, shined a light in there, and he could see the pipe that was the instrument that was used to bludgeon Penny to death. And he could also see knives.
Eventually, they uncovered the jewelry that had been taken from the house, as well as a pair of rubber gloves. They turned them inside out, and inside one of the gloves, they were able to recover a fingerprint that they matched Roger Skaggs' fingerprints.
Vanessa disappeared, and we tried to find her.
They realized, she's not in town. Where is she gone?
Roger Skaggs, the upstanding businessman and devout Christian, was charged with the brutal murder of his wife, Penny. During their investigation, detectives discovered that Roger had been leading a double life. He was having an affair with a coworker, attending swingers parties, and wanted to rid himself of Penny so that he could avoid a costly divorce.
I never saw any evidence of problems in their marriage. They were always with each other and always very supportive of each other.
We believe that he is innocent and are here to, basically show our love and support for him, really.
On March 6th of 1996, Penny Skaggs was bludgeoned to death with a pipe, cut with a knife in her West Austin home.
The district attorney assigned their 2 top trial lawyers to this case. So you're aware going in that you have a lot of high-powered lawyers with large egos, and the stakes are extremely high.
Penny Skaggs, the evidence will show, taught hundreds of women on how to be a Christian wife and mother. On March the 6th, when EMS, police were called to this residence, they went in, they found Penny Skaggs with her legs tucked up underneath the piano, which she loved so much to play. They found her head and body in a pool of blood. The blood that had given her life such energy and vibrancy, the evidence will show, was now splashed across her beloved piano.
So Roger's defense attorneys really didn't have a huge leg to stand on. They tried to pull some forensic evidence, some fingerprints stating, well, none of these matched Roger, Penny, or other friends and family, so it had to be this stranger intrusion, home invasion.
Let's talk about this affair for a little bit. I know that there are 8 of you that are not going to think that this is very funny when I say it, but let me say it in the worst way that I possibly can, ladies. Lots and lots of men have sexual relations with other women besides their wives. And the marriage doesn't appear to be the worse for it. The love for their wives does not change that much. It does not have any bearing whatsoever as they see it on their relationship. All of this is the imagination of Mr. Case. Not really. It is him hoping that you will draw on your imagination for something like that. To start saying that he is going to kill his wife to avoid getting a divorce, because if he got a divorce, he would lose customers and that would ruin his business, when there is not one scintilla of evidence that there was ever any thought of divorce or any thought of any problems in that marriage, is going so far that somebody is stretching an incredible amount.
On the night of the crime, when the police were over there, he was being consoled, I guess you would say, on one of the neighbors' sofas, and he just never seemed like anything tragic or even out of the ordinary had happened.
He was very calm about and controlled about everything. His answers were very deliberate when he was asked any specific questions. He would look over and he would see that I was watching him, and he would suddenly look down at his lap and start to cry. The way he would just turn on and off, it was like he had realized he was supposed to be upset.
The police took him down to homicide detail, and David Carter interviewed him.
Sergeant Revelis told me that Penny Skaggs was found dead in her house, and that by her husband, Roger Skaggs, and that he would be coming to the police department, and they wanted me to interview him and take a statement from him.
His affect was flat. He made some mistakes in the way he misanswered a couple of questions.
Mr. Skaggs, I know it's difficult for me to force you to think in these terms, but I'd like you to try and tell me what you think happened. I decided to employ a technique which was to ask him what he thought had happened. When you ask a person who has just discovered something traumatic, what do you think happened? The usual response is, I don't know.
This was, in my opinion, perhaps the best investigation I've ever seen conducted by the Austin Police Department.
I mean, it's conceivable somebody could have come to the door and she told her to go away and then went around to the back, or it could have been, you know, somebody just wandering down the street.
He speculated there's these people that would occasionally come to the area, transients or like magazine salesmen. Mr. Skaggs indicated that Penny wore at first he said lots of jewelry. He changed that and indicated that she wore some jewelry, but it was expensive and it was not good. I guess the jewelry contained large diamonds.
She wears a lot of, not a lot, but, well, she wears some pretty big diamond jewelry. She has a nice big wedding ring, a big center stone, and stones all around it, and a couple of necklaces with a lot of diamonds. And, you know, that could have, I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out.
Mr. Skaggs speculated that one of these transients came to the front door. Penny told him to go away. At that point, that person was able to go around to the back of the house in this area that was very dark. Mr. Skaggs then indicated that Penny was most likely playing the piano. Mr. Skaggs said that Penny was real focused and sitting there, and then he corrected himself, would have been sitting there.
And then, you know, she was real focused and sitting there, and her back is kind of to that area, would be to that area when she does that. And that's the only thing.
And in my experience, when a person starts going down this direction and places themselves in the first person, it's possible they are reliving an event.
I have never seen Roger even raise his voice.
He's probably one of the most non-confrontational people I've ever known.
Do you believe that he would be capable of carrying out such an act as the murder of his wife or the murder of anyone?
No, I can't imagine that.
After the murder of Penny Skaggs, investigators quickly focused on her husband, Roger, because of a surprising lack of emotion he showed at the loss of his wife. That suspicion motivated investigators to seize and search the dumpsters behind his office building. And it's there where they made the case-breaking discovery that led to Roger being arrested and charged with Penny's murder.
I think the prosecution's strategy was basically there was the motive. He had the girlfriend, and surely his wife would not approve.
There was a convention, a swingers convention in the ballroom of their hotel, and they went.
And okay. Did he say that he and Vanessa Ferguson attended the swingers convention?
Yes.
The most damning evidence that the district attorney presented was evidence of Roger Skaggs and Vanessa in Las Vegas engaged in various activities.
Describe how you met him, please.
I did his nails
And when was this?
in October 4th of '96.
And did he have anybody else with him?
Yes, sir.
Who?
Vanessa Ferguson.
Roger Skaggs had been in a relationship with Vanessa. And I think a lot of people at the office suspected it for a long time.
Curiosity got the best of us, and we had heard rumors for nearly a year of that he was having an affair with someone. And we decided, let's see where he's going.
Okay.
And so we followed him.
And was there any kind of greeting between Roger and Vanessa?
Yes, he hugged her and kissed her.
I said to Roger, well, Roger, I need to understand about this affair that you have told me about. And what is it all about? And it struck me so profoundly how he described it that I wrote the two words down. He called it animal lust.
You know, somebody who has just animal lust towards someone and they're married to a woman who is, I guess you could say, prudish, you can kind of start seeing how someone who likes animal lust would enjoy this secretary of his.
What is it that Roger did not provide Penny with that you believe that Penny wanted him to do? And I apologize to America, but I want to find out. What is it?
An attentive and loving husband.
Okay. More showing of attention than Roger did. Is that correct?
Not more, some attention.
Penny was getting wise to what was going on, and that had a lot to do with why the murder happened when it did. Soon after the murder, I mean almost immediately, Vanessa disappeared, and we tried to find her.
She was given to us as a main chief defense witness, but she disappeared, and I issued subpoenas and eventually arrest warrants for her, but she was never able to be located.
From knowing Roger Skaggs for this period of time, in your opinion, does he have any propensity at all for violence?
None. Well, the defense strategy was the normal strategy. It certainly wasn't Roger. He was a good, decent person. Yes, he was having a relationship with this Vanessa Ferguson, but in no way was he capable or would he have ever done such a gruesome act as this.
And in knowing Roger Skaggs for this period of time, have you formed an opinion as to whether he has any propensity for violence at all?
I have never seen Roger even raise his voice, much less be violent.
I had an opportunity to observe Roger in many, many different situations, including being under pressure. And he's probably one of the most non-confrontational people I've ever known.
All right, sir.
Very laid back.
This is a murder trial, as I think you know. And Roger's on trial for the murder of his wife, Penny. I don't want to go into any of the evidence with you. I just want to ask you one question about this. From everything that you know about Roger Skaggs, do you believe that he would be capable of carrying out such an act as the murder of his wife or the murder of anyone?
No, I can't imagine that. I mean, he'd be the last one that I would ever think would be capable of doing something like that.
As witness.
I wanted to understand how both of these people thought, and felt like I had to understand it in the context of their daily lives and in the context of their church.
Well, actually, I went over there, first of all, just to be a comfort to Roger and find out what happened. I think by that time I knew that Penny had been killed.
I found the pastor, went to his service 2 times just to try to understand what makes this church tick.
From my experience, all people who love someone dearly want to talk and talk and talk about this person. But I did think it rather strange that he did not want to, just talk about Penny and, things about her. He just really wanted to just go on and plan the funeral.
I said, well, Roger, what they say, you shouldn't make any important decisions for the first year.
Okay.
And he said, oh, no, you know me better than that. I'm not going to wait in a year.
I'm not gonna what?
I'm not going to wait in a year to make any important decisions. And he laughed and he said, by that time, I could be married 2 or 3 times over.
After the murder and then after Roger was released, they kind of reinstated Roger. And at one point, he came in and he made a joke about Penny's murder. And I said, Roger, how can you joke about this? And I will never forget these words as long as I live. He said, if you don't see the humor of it, it will drive you crazy. And I said, how can you see the humor? There's no humor here. I'll never forget that as long as I live.
He didn't even act kind of sorry that Penny was gone. It was, what he did say was he sort of missed the things that she did, like he had problems either finding the checkbook or writing checks or that kind of thing, and there wasn't any anger about, trying to find somebody who did this to her or anything like that. It was just real unemotional.
Does today hold any special significance to you, Ms. Goldman?
Yes, it does.
What is it?
It's Penny's birthday. She would have been 57.
57?
Today.
They said it's pretty clear cut. A story as old as time. Husband meets another woman and needs to get out of his marriage, and she wasn't the type woman who would give him a divorce readily, so he resorted to this.
Penny Skaggs was a homemaker all her life. She didn't work. How much of his fortune do you think she would have gotten? Wouldn't have been just 50%.
The jury in the Roger Skaggs murder trial have learned a lot about him and his extramarital activities. While a key witness refused to testify, the state has provided powerful physical evidence that is impossible to explain away. The only question is, will it be enough to convict Roger Skaggs?
Penny had no enemies. There was no reason for anyone to have killed her, except that they needed her to be dead. And Roger was the only one in any recognition that we had that could possibly benefit from her death. And it just made sense.
Haven't you seen in the last 3 weeks more denial and hypocrisy that you've ever seen in your whole life. The denial of Penny Skaggs, the hypocrisy of Roger Skaggs. I had to be able to explain it to the jury. If they couldn't understand what was going on in these two people's makeup, then they would never be able to understand just the sheer material evidence. The defense wants to talk to you about a madman or somebody driven to such extreme rage. Whatever he is, he may be ridiculous. He's not a madman, and he's cool, calm, and collected. All the better to do a crime like this. Tell you what, Penny Skaggs was a homemaker all her life. She didn't work. How much of his fortune do you think she would have gotten upon divorce? Wouldn't have been just 50%. Let's talk 70 and 80. That's what she would have gotten. That's a lot of money that he can't use either on Vanessa Ferguson or whoever else. The way he behaved, very calculating, very non-emotional. The police just, from the very beginning, they knew, they said, something's just not right here. Cool, calm, and collected, all the better to plan this out, to have the gall to go do it, and then tell everybody the stories he did, and then have the gall to tell these sisters over here that he's gonna be remarried and move out of Austin and tell Penny's best friend he doesn't want to go to the burial. Oh, he's got a flair for the extravagant, all right. He's got a flair for the extravagant. And this murder was extravagant.
The state has decided that because they do not have, or at least I believe they have decided, that because they do not have sufficient evidence to be able to establish that Roger went home and for some reason, out of nowhere, murdered his wife in the most brutal way that you can imagine, and you've seen now, that they're going to have to make a demon out of Roger Skaggs. And that's what, as Randy said, they have spent 90% of their time doing, is making a demon out of him. The evidence has shown no such thing. All of those words, all of those suggestions have come from right here, not from right there. We have had a few dear friends of Penny's who have wanted to get up there and speculate as to what Penny was thinking. We had this very capable lawyer, Brian Case, telling you earlier that Roger had made up his mind that he was going to have to kill his wife because if he divorced his wife, he wouldn't get as many clients anymore, and he would have to give her 70 to 80% of all the property that they have. Brian Case is the only person who has ever used the word divorce in this case. And he is already telling you that there was a divorce on board and it was going to cost him 70 or 80% of his home and his stock and whatever money he had on hand and his cars, his entire estate. I do not believe that you people can sit down in the quiet of your room and think over all of this evidence. Put yourselves in Penny's position, put yourselves in Roger's position, and come to any thought that at 5:30 in the afternoon, when he left that office, he was going home to murder his wife. That is crazy.
The members of the jury would please retire to commence your deliberations. Thank you. I'm always concerned, but I wasn't that concerned because I had 12 people, and I figured, you know, they could have had me do it, but fortunately they elected to have 12 jurors. The 12 jurors were very attentive. They listened to the evidence. No one was nodding off. No one was sleeping or anything like that. So I had confidence that they did the right thing. Speaking to your foreperson, have you arrived at a verdict in this case?
Yes, we have, Your Honor.
If you would, sir, please stand and read your verdict.
We tried the case just like we wanted to. We fully expected a guilty. They were out 8.5 hours.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Roger Thomas Skaggs, guilty of the offense of murder as alleged in the indictment.
I think that the verdict wasn't a surprise simply because of the evidence. I think that the simplest answer was going to be Roger. He had motive, and his timeline didn't work out. His alibi didn't match up. Despite him being a wealthy white man, luck was not on his side.
I am not satisfied that this man killed Penny Skaggs, and that is the truth as I stand here. I am not satisfied with that. I've thought about it as much as anybody, and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that he came home at his wife's request, ate supper, and carried that out before he went back and worked another couple hours. That never has made sense to me.
We are pleased with the verdict. We felt like justice and truth would be honored here, and they were today. Sense of relief, but it's not over. We have another phase of this trial, and we're preparing ourselves for that.
After deliberating, the jurors came back and unanimously found Roger Skaggs guilty, and then we proceeded to have the second portion of the trial where the juries determined the punishment to be assessed Mr. Skaggs. In addition, the juries recommend the defendant receive a sentence of 32 years confinement in the institutional division and a fine of $10,000.
The sentence was 32 years. I mean, we asked for a life sentence, right? And we were, at first, quite shocked that he only got 32 years.
But my recollection is that 32 years was the length of their marriage, or the length of time that Roger and Penny had known each other. I've tried quite a few murder cases, and that's the only 32-year verdict I've ever seen.
I think that people are still talking about this case because it is relatable. People in marriages, you know, can struggle with a spouse. There's definitely a level of narcissism that comes with these offenders, and the sort of entitlement and elitist attitude, thinking that no one can touch me, the law can't touch me, I covered my tracks. And the fact of the matter is that it's not always the case, and clearly you're not the smartest guy in the room.
I think we've increasingly seen the hypocrisy of a considerable number of religious leaders in this country. The mere fact that you're a minister of a large flock in no way guarantees that you're an outstanding human being or a person who follows in God's footsteps.
Roger Skaggs is currently serving out his sentence in the Turl unit of the Texas Department of Corrections. Although he's been eligible, parole has been denied. He remains behind bars and is due to be released in the year 2030. I'm Tamron Hall. Thank you for watching Someone They Knew.
Everybody in Defiance, Iowa knew Scott Shanahan and Dixie Shanahan from growing up.
It was the epitome of an abusive relationship.
No one had seen Scott for close to a year. One day we got a search warrant to go in the house.
They tried to get into the master bedroom. There's all this clutter that's blocking the main door.
Everybody in their small Iowa town knew about the violent abuse that was happening behind closed doors. They could hear him screaming at her. They saw her swollen black eyes and the nasty bruises. They watched as the squad cars pulled up to their house and took him away again and again. They told her to leave him, but she couldn't seem to get away. And people started to fear it was only a matter of time before he went too far.
Defiance, Iowa is a very little town. It wouldn't appear on most maps in the United States. It's a town at the time that had about 346 people.
Shelby County is a farming community, rural community. There's about 10 towns, small towns in Shelby County. Defiance is a very small community. Everybody knows everybody in Defiance.
As far as with Dixie Shanahan, she spent most of her life in Defiance. She had a very tough childhood. Her father died when she was very young, and her stepfather sexually abused her. And the family was often on the move. She moved to the town when she was 16 years old. That's when she and Scott Shanahan developed a courtship.
I think one of the things that it's important to remember about Dixie is that she was still very, very young. One of the highest risk factors is that as children, they come from abusive relationships. So either physically abused, sexually abused, they're just at a higher risk to essentially go from one, abuser's arms straight into another's abuser's arm, because that's what they've known their whole life.
They met when she was 16 years old, and he was 21 years old. They got married. Now, Scott really didn't do a whole lot. They relied on an inheritance. They had 2 small children together, and it was during this time period that the relationship really came to a head. 1997 was the first time that Dixie went to the police as far as getting law enforcement, being the Shelby County Sheriff's Office, involved in a domestic violence incident that she had been a victim of.
Scott was a very manipulative individual, very abusive towards Dixie. During my time as sheriff, we arrested Scott numerous times on abuse charges.
Dixie Shanahan suffered a lot of abuse. Some of it was mental abuse, where Scott would call her names, he would belittle her. Other times, it was physical abuse. She had a lot of bruises up and down her arms and legs. There were even times that he bit her. There was other situations that I recall where he exploded. He actually dragged her down to the basement and tied her up with wire from a coat hanger, and even told her that he could leave her down here just to die.
It was the epitome of an abusive relationship. He beat her on a regular basis. When she got pregnant, he punched her in the stomach, trying to make her miscarry the baby. Dixie had been ordered by Scott to get an abortion, and Dixie's Catholic, and so she refused. And so he beat her. She did leave on a couple of occasions. Once she went to Texas, but she always came back. She came back because she was afraid of him. She was afraid he would either take or hurt the kids. And she was also afraid that Scott would hurt her.
I've known Dixie for years. I've known Scott for years. And I knew what was going on. And I thought that we did the best we could to get her out of the situation and to try to protect her.
The Sheriff's Office does a real good job as far as responding any and every time that they're made aware of a domestic violence situation. Unfortunately, even when those arrests happened, Dixie would start to come to his defense. She would write letters begging for mercy, begging for a lighter sentence, but she would always write the letter from the standpoint of, she wants to bring the family back together and that Scott's changing or he has changed.
We were able to get her to Texas, away from Scott. Her kids and her went to Texas to be with her sister. I think Scott went back down there after he got out of jail and brought her back.
Often women try to pacify them, as the husband as well. So when a neighbor calls the cops and turns them into the police department and police come and haul him away, they know at some point he's going to get out and at some point he's going to come back, and this could be the time when he really does do a lot of damage.
Most people, they didn't like Scott because the things he did and the way he treated people. I was not surprised that this happened. I always thought sooner or later, with the abuse situation going on, this could happen, and unfortunately it did.
There's just small things that happen over time that make people around town start to scratch their head and wonder, hey, something doesn't seem right here.
Scott Shanahan's abuse of his wife, Dixie, continued for years. Victims of repeated mental and physical abuse often feel trapped with nowhere to go. And experts know that the greatest violence most often follows when an abused woman tries to leave or stand up for herself. But then things take a turn. Scott leaves Dixie.
Everybody in Defiance, Iowa knew Scott Shanahan and Dixie Shanahan from growing up, and people genuinely felt sorry and sympathetic for her.
Her relationship with Scott was abusive, and it becomes very clear later that he was physically abusive. She had black eyes, just emotionally drained and abused.
Even when she was pregnant, this abuse occurred. There were no boundaries. If she was pregnant, she was not pregnant, you know, daytime, nighttime, it really didn't matter. The abuse continued, and I think over time it was well documented that it intensified. There was times that she was just very scared and also felt trapped as far as, you know, where else can she turn, where else can she go?
She acted in a way that really speaks of the violence and the frustration of being somebody's slave and being violated every day.
After the summer of 2002, people aren't seeing Scott around town. For a lot of people around Defiance, Iowa, the feeling was good riddance.
One day, I can't remember who the person was that came in the sheriff's office, said, you know, we haven't seen Scott around Defiance for quite a while. I went up there to talk to Dixie. She told me that he'd ran away with another woman.
It's not really until the following summer, a whole year later, that there's just small things that happen over time that make people around town start to scratch their head and wonder, hey, something doesn't seem right here.
I didn't think a whole lot about it at first, but she started selling Scott's possessions. And if you know Scott, he'd have beat the heck out of her. He'd have made her pay.
There was one individual out of Council Bluffs, Iowa, that eventually came up to Defiance, Iowa, and bought a 1960s Chevette off of Dixie Shanahan. And he was a little bit apprehensive about even making the purchase because he knew that this car, you know, belonged to Dixie's husband. He was assured by Dixie Shanahan, there's nothing to worry about, that Scott Shanahan isn't coming back. We had the situation replay itself several times over the next several months. A lot of people were starting to wonder about the fact that why is Dixie selling off these, you know, these possessions of Scott? Some people were starting to wonder, you know, this is starting to not make sense.
Some people started to look for Scott Shanahan because he was not to be seen. When she started selling off Scott's property, she sold a tractor of his and some other equipment. People around town knew how jealous he was of his belongings.
In the summer of late July of 2003, the Shelby County Sheriff's Office, this is the first time that they receive a formal phone call or an inquiry asking them to follow up on Scott Shanahan. They start to do a background check into Scott Shanahan, and they're unable to find any records as far as employment records, that he's working a job anywhere in Iowa. And the sheriff's office was pretty much coming to the conclusion that Scott Shanahan fell off the face of the earth about this time a year ago.
We were very suspicious. So, you know, that led to an investigation. We did some checking. No signs of Scott. 50 state check for driver's license. Okay, maybe he did go to another state. Nothing. I contacted the DCI, which is a criminal investigation unit for the Iowa State Patrol. We talked about it. We went up there and talked to Dixie a couple times. Of course, she never would let me in the house. One day we got a search warrant to go in the house.
When the police go into the house. They try to get into the master bedroom. There's all this clutter that's blocking the main door.
Nearly a year has gone by with no sign of Scott Shanahan. For many folks in town, including his wife, Dixie, that seems like a good thing. She even starts dating someone new. But someone started asking, and that's when the sheriff starts looking a little closer. Where is Scott Shanahan?
In the third week of October of 2003, the Shelby County Sheriff's Office decides that they feel that they have enough probable cause to go to the Shanahan house armed with a search warrant. Nobody knew for sure if they were going to find anything. Although in one of the brainstorming sessions, they did talk a lot about where Scott Shanahan could be. Maybe he's buried in the backyard.
No one had seen Scott around for close to a year. That's unlike him because he was a homebody. He stayed around Defiance. Went to the judge, got a search warrant for the house. We went in the house. There was a bedroom that was doors closed. There was towels underneath the door. There was candles lit by the door. And she had told her boyfriend at the time and the kids, do not go in this room. Now, if it was me, you told me not to go in the room, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to go in the room.
When the police go into the house with this search warrant, they try to get into the master bedroom. There's all this clutter that's blocking the main door. And this clutter included some large cardboard television boxes. When the police officers got this door open from the hallway, they immediately were overcome by the smell of foul odors that there was a dead body in the master bedroom. As they panned and looked into the room, they saw what they described as being a lump in the middle of the bed.
Terrible smell. We walked in and found him in bed, just where he was, and he had been there for a year.
The police had to ultimately go up to the bed and peel the covers back, and that's when they were aghast at, the smell was bad enough, but then the sight that they came across. And as they looked closer and closer to the body, there were signs of lots and lots of dead maggots and other types of insects that had devoured parts of the body, including the flesh. And it was clear to the police and ultimately through the Iowa Medical Examiner's Office that Scott Shanahan had died from a gunshot wound.
Dixie thought she saw him move toward it, so she grabbed the shotgun and fired a slug into the back of his head.
I think when she closed that door and locked that door and then put the chest of drawers behind the other door from the bathroom to the bedroom, she locked that part of her life out.
Well, having the body in the room for a year, I think is all part and parcel of her mental state at the time. I'm not a psychiatrist, but research that I've done over the years indicates that that women who suffer abuse, they call it the battered women syndrome, have a tendency to develop post-traumatic stress syndrome, which can lead to delusions.
I don't know if I could identify an exact point where somebody would snap or would kind of go from being abused to finally standing up for themselves. If throughout the day she had been being told that she was going to be killed or that she was going to be harmed, if she went in there, if he moved or did something that she perceived as him waking up or being a threat, and just kind of decided at that point that she needed to protect herself.
Before we got into the house with the search warrant, Dixie wanted to go to a neighbor out on the highway from Defiance and asked me if I would take her out there. Of course, I said yes, I would. So when I dropped her off at this neighbor's house, She looked me in the eye. He said, Gene, this is where I'll be, because she knew we were going to find him once we went in the house. Well, after we found him, we went back out and arrested her.
I think that, you know, the town certainly had an idea that it was coming. I think there were many reports of either it was going to be her or it was going to be him. And I think the town was pretty supportive of Dixie in the fact that she was arrested and was in jail. The town kind of came together and raised, you know, a whole bunch of money to get her free.
Well, when you get beat and locked up in the basement and tied up and he tried to abort her baby and stuff, you know, you can only handle so much before you snap.
At this point in time, after Scott died, she gave birth to their third child. So Dixie has 3 young, small children at the time that she's now arrested. For a lot of people around Defiance, Iowa, the feeling was this guy got what he deserved, you know, end of story. You know, why should Dixie Shanahan be put in handcuffs?
The prosecutor's job is to do justice, and you try to keep emotions out of it. And you really have to remain objective. Of course, there's time for sympathy, but you can't prosecute a case based on who is the more sympathetic figure. If criminal cases were handled that way, it would be nonsensical. That's just not the way the legal system sees that it should be handled. You have to look at all the facts and all the circumstances. When I filed the case as a first-degree murder case, I felt that that was the charge warranted based simply on the facts as were presented in the investigation.
Feldman just kept going over and over the fact that this was a head wound to the back of the head. And he kept stressing upon the jury, this was a man that was shot in his sleep.
Dixie Shanahan is arrested for killing her husband, but after years of violent abuse, many in the public feel he got what he deserved. Even the judge questions whether this case should go before a jury.
Before the case came to trial, we had a pretrial conference in Council Bluffs. I felt it was a first-degree murder case. That's what I'd filed. The defense never had asked us to consider anything less. The judge asked what plea negotiations had we had. I said none. So at that point, the defense lawyer voiced his belief that she would plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter.
Manslaughter would have carried a maximum 10-year prison sentence, but in all likelihood, Dixie would have only had to serve about 2 to 2.5 years of prison time. Greg Stensland, Dixie Shanahan's lawyer, ultimately gets back to Thelman and says, you know, the plea bargain fell through. Dixie wants to go to trial.
All rise. Court is now in session.
Please be seated. We'll begin with Mr. Tolman, and he will address you first.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is the formal charge that has been laid in this case, and it reads as follows. In the Iowa District Court for Shelby County, State of Iowa plaintiff versus Dixie L. Shanahan defendant accuses Dixie L. Shanahan of the crime of murder in the first degree. And the said Dixie Shanahan, on or about the month of August 2002, in Shelby County, Iowa, did willfully, deliberately, and with premeditation and malice aforethought kill Scott Shanahan. To this charge, the defendant has entered a plea of not guilty.
The case was pretty open and shut as far as Charles Thelman, the Assistant Attorney General, was concerned. This was cold-blooded murder. It happened in the middle of the night, perhaps, while Scott Shanahan was sleeping.
Their marriage was a troubled marriage. There's no doubt about it. He was probably a person most of us would say was hard to like. He was just not a popular guy. He was not particularly friendly. You just admit that to the jury, and because that's the reality of the situation. And then you just present the facts and see where the jury takes it from there. People actually questioned her, or the issue of where Scott was came up, and the defendant told stories about where Scott was. She said, told one person, well, he had a girlfriend that he'd run off with. Another person, well, he's living with a dope dealer down in Atlantic, Iowa. One day he had jumped out the back window, took off, and I never saw him again. Don't know where he's at. I'm going to argue that and tell you that she did not act in self-defense.
that she is guilty of murder in the first degree, and I'll ask you to return that verdict.
From the perspective of Dixie Shanahan's lawyers, Greg Stenslin and Chuck Fagan, her defense was all about this was a justifiable homicide, that Dixie was being attacked, she'd been beaten that day, and that she made a quick snap decision to grab the shotgun and shoot him in self-defense.
You were told that this is a case about choices. And to a certain extent, I would agree. This is a case about choices, but it's a case about what happens to those choices. It's a case about abuse. It's a case about control. It's a case about justification. And it's a case about how Scott Shanahan took away from Dixie every other choice that she had and left her with the only choice, and that was to kill him. The law says that's justified. It's not pretty, it's not nice, it's not what we want, but it's justified. At the end of the case, I'll be asking you to return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
There was so much overwhelming support and sympathy, on her behalf that it just really seemed hard to fathom the idea that the prosecution's going to take this to trial, and they're going full throttle for a first-degree murder conviction on this case. As I sat through the trial, my attitude shifted.
You can call your first witness.
What is that object?
Behind the box, the folded-up box on the in front of the door, there was a rolled-up towel, first of all, and we can see the edge of a rolled-up towel at the base of the box here. What we did at this point then was to remove the towel from the doorway and attempt to enter that master bedroom. First thing that we noted when we opened the doorway was a bad odor in the room.
After making the photographs without disturbing the sheets as we've just seen, what was your next step then?
I just looked slightly under that white blanket you see on the top side of the bed there and did notice a body under there.
The police had to ultimately go up to the bed and peel the covers back, and that's when they were aghast at, the smell was bad enough, but then the sight that they came across, just unnerved them, and it was something that stuck with them, for the rest of their careers without a doubt.
Some of these photographs are fairly hard to look at. Is that
some of these are quite graphic.
That's the word I was looking for.
What this initial photograph shows is there was a white blanket that was folded about in a fourth of what it normally would be, and that was covering the head area of the individual, the deceased here. At this point in time, upon close examination, we noted a hole in the back side of the head.
Thelman just kept going over and over the fact that this was a head wound to the back of the head, and he kept stressing upon the jury, this was a man that was shot in his sleep.
And, Your Honor, at this time, the state of Iowa rests.
I thought we'd put on the best case we could have. I thought our case got stronger when the defense began to present its case, and particularly when the defendant testified. And I think she made some admissions that were damning.
The defense will begin today. Mr. Stenslin, you can call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We would call Dixie Shanahan. What did he do?
Pulled me by the hair and started beating me on the stomach. He was hollering, I'm gonna kill this baby one way or another. I'm gonna kill it.
After hearing from the state's witnesses, there's no doubt that Dixie Shanahan killed her husband, Scott, by shooting him in the back of the head. Now the defense calls Dixie herself to explain what happened. Can she convince the jury that what she did was justified?
At her trial, Dixie Shanahan testified in her own defense, and she didn't waver about the fact that she was responsible for Scott Shanahan's death.
It's important to know that, women who are battered, they've learned that they cannot flee and they cannot fight because bad things happen. So they essentially learn that they freeze, and they've learned to kind of detach, right? So they just tend to dissociate from the situation that they're in.
In late August, was there a discovery that was made by you for this?
Yes, there was.
What was that?
That I was pregnant again.
How did he react to that?
He went ballistic.
What did he tell you to do?
Have an abortion.
What did you tell him?
No way.
Can you describe the first couple of days to the jury?
He just kept beating on me and telling me that there was no way I was going to have this baby, that he would make sure that I was not going to have this baby, and that there was nothing that I could do about it.
I think there's a big inconsistency between what we would consider an immediate threat and what she considers an immediate threat, right? It's really hard kind of for us who have not been in that situation to really get that. What we know about that, Scott had planned to, or had told her that the day was not over. He was still gonna shoot her. He was going to kill her. So the threat to her was still very real, still very imminent.
You remember August 30th, 2002?
Yes, I do. I got Zachary dressed that morning, and I told him, you better go wake up your dad.
Then what happened?
About 10 minutes later, he came out of the bedroom. And
Scott
came out of the bedroom and flew into rage because I didn't make sure he was awake when Zachary got on the school bus.
What did he do?
Pulled me by the hair and started beating me on the stomach. He was hollering, I'm gonna kill this baby one way or another. I'm gonna kill it.
What happened at the time of the incident in question, Scott had been beating her that day and punching her in the stomach, and he threatened her with a shotgun. And later on, they were in the bedroom, and Scott was laying down. He may have been asleep, we don't know. But the shotgun was next to him, and Dixie testified that she thought she saw him move toward it, so she grabbed the shotgun and fired a slug into the back of his head.
I think that this was definitely a tragedy. It was tragic in many ways. It's tragic for a woman who had been abused for her entire life to be left in a situation where she felt that her only way out was to kill him in order to protect herself and her children, her unborn child. That itself is a tragedy. She felt that Scott was an imminent threat to her. Whether he was sitting on the couch, whether he was asleep, this wasn't something that had just happened once. This was a pattern of abuse that had been going on for years and years and years. So she knew by, a look in his eye. She knew by a certain word. She knew by a certain action. She knew what was coming or what, at some point what was going to happen, whether it was another beating. And I could guess that at some point in her head, she's like, is this going to be the day when he actually kills me?
Anything else, Mr. Stinson?
Not this time, thank you.
All right. Mr. Tillman, you may cross-examine the witness.
Thank you, Your Honor.
When Dixie was done testifying at her trial, that obviously gave an opportunity for Chuck Thoman, the prosecutor for Iowa, to ask her probing questions, especially as he had a chance to really try to tear apart and rip apart Dixie Shanahan's testimony on the stand in front of all these jurors.
It would have been better if she had not testified, in my opinion. It's the prosecutor's dream is to get a defendant on the stand.
He didn't move after you shot him, did he?
I didn't, no, didn't, that I know of.
You didn't move him after you shot him, did you?
Not that I know of.
Left him just as he was when you shot him, right?
Yes.
All you did was pull up the sheets.
Yes.
Pull up the sheets to cover the body.
Yes, I did.
Look at that exhibit, man. That's exhibit 33. That's somebody who's asleep.
No, he was not asleep.
That's not someone who's reaching for a gun, ma'am.
He made a movement. I thought he was coming after me.
What movement did he make?
He was not. It was like he was coming over, rolling over in the bed.
He had to be facing you then. He had to be facing you. You're saying the gun was over here? Over here to the right?
Yes.
Well, when he made a movement for the gun, if you're telling us the truth, he was facing you, not with his back to you.
All I can say is he made a movement. I thought he was coming for the gun.
Thoman didn't raise his voice during the trial. He was very calm, kept his voice down, but just kept harping upon the fact that, ma'am, you shot him while he was sleeping. Dixie denied it, said, no, this was an argument, I feared for my life. But again, Thoman was just very calm about the whole thing. And if I were on that jury at that point in time, it kind of made me think that they were probably thinking that way too.
I'm not saying where he was at or whatever. I thought he made a movement for that gun, and I wasn't going to let him do it.
That's how you shot him. You didn't move him. That's how he was when he was shot, right?
Yes.
By the end of the trial, I was thinking, yeah, I could see a first-degree murder conviction coming back. It seems like, yeah, she took the stand and raised her hand and promised to tell the truth, but the version of events that she told, either she convinced herself this is what happened, or she was just outright lying to the jury as far as she made up a story.
He was not facing you when you shot the...
No, but he did move, and I did feel that my life was in danger. The man had already pointed a gun at me twice that day. I had no reason in my mind to not believe that he would hurt me at that point.
He was sleeping, man.
No, he was not.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Nothing, thank you.
Thank you.
Can you step down? Call your next witness.
Call Lori Shipper.
The defense called a witness from Iowa State University. This deposition lasted 2.5 hours, I would estimate, and I never was able to quite understand the basis for any of her conclusions. Ma'am, your sole academic degree is a Bachelor of Science in Social Work from Iowa State.
That's correct.
You're not a psychologist.
No.
You're not a psychiatrist, obviously.
No.
You haven't interviewed the defendant in this case.
That's correct. I have not.
Haven't met her.
No, not to my knowledge.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Ms. Shipper, as a person in your position, do you start out with a basic definition of domestic violence?
Yes, there is a fairly agreed upon definition.
And what is that?
Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior, including physical, sexual, psychological abuse, and economic coercion used to gain control and compliance over one's intimate partner.
Is that different from just other abusive acts?
Yes, it is. Because it is between intimate partners, because it is a pattern of behavior, and its purpose, it is purposeful. It is used to lower someone's self-esteem and get control of them, to prohibit them from exiting the relationship.
The jury didn't get to hear about battered women's syndrome. It probably would have been more prudent to get a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, and to testify. So the jury never got to hear that. All the jury heard was that he beat her up.
We have a myth, I believe, in our culture that we all at some point just want her to leave. And if she would just leave, everything would be okay. Advocates have the same sort of guttural response to wishing she would leave.
I have not examined Dixie Shanahan. I have not spoken with her, so I obviously couldn't give an official diagnosis. But I can say that a lot of the symptoms that she exhibited would be very consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder and battered women's syndrome.
There is no battered women's defense per se, but it is applicable to a claim of self-defense. And so she needed that to complete her story and tell the jury why she did what she did. You have to be able to explain your actions, and with the expert psychological testimony, she could have explained why she did, what her perception was.
I think we can all say that Scott Shanahan had it coming. I don't know what difference that would make in a court of law, simply because we have rules are, the court has their rules, and they have, hey, if somebody does this, then, this is the sentence for it. I guess that's where people like I come in and try to say, yes, this happened, but this is why it happened. And there are things beyond our control that we, don't always take into consideration.
If a person believes, I've just had to kill someone because my life was threatened, they're going to open themselves up and say, I had to do it. Is that what this defendant did?
As both the state and the defense rest their cases, the jury must decide what should happen to Dixie Shanahan. The answer may all come down to where their sympathies lie.
A lot of people had had strong feelings one way or the other. There weren't too many people that were stuck in the middle as far as their opinions on this case.
I think the state may have been afraid of jury nullification. Jury nullification is where the jury ignores the law in reaching a verdict, even though the state has proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury doesn't believe it serves justice, so they acquit.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is the time for the closing arguments. There are plenty of women that deal with this issue. Some have more success than others, but she showed that, yeah, there is a way out. Now, if a person acts in self-defense, if a person believes, I've just had to kill someone because my life was threatened, they're going to open themselves up and say, I had to do it. Come in here, investigate this. That's what a person that has really acted with justification is going to do. Is that what this defendant did? No, she engaged in a pattern of deception, an active concealment of her crime. She shot him in the back of the head while he was sleeping. Those are important facts for you to consider, obviously, determining whether she acted with justification. So for these reasons, ladies and gentlemen, the state has proved its case to you that this defendant is guilty of the main crime of murder in the first degree. And I'm going to ask you at the conclusion of this case to find this defendant guilty as charged with the crime of murder in the first degree. As a representative of the state, I'm supposed to do the right thing, do what's just. I'm not supposed to be a salesman and trying to sell them something that isn't there. And so my whole attempt, my whole point is, whenever I do a closing argument, is to just try to present it in a reasonable fashion and let the facts speak for themselves and let the jury work through it.
This case is about what happened on that day, August 30th, and what Dixie brings to the case. There are traumatic effects that result in a person who's battered in Dixie. Dixie believed, had an honest and sincere belief that he was coming after her, picked up the gun, pointed it, shot. She is conducting herself with the normal response of a terrified person. The only verdict that can be reached when you seek the truth and do justice, in this case, is a verdict of not guilty.
She was looking at 3 different levels of guilt: first-degree murder, second-degree murder, or voluntary manslaughter. So when it went to the jury, I felt that we had made a case for first degree, but I could see with sympathies coming from the jurors themselves that they may return a verdict of a lesser degree.
Has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes.
The defendant and her counsel and prosecutor, please stand. This is the state of Iowa versus Dixie Lynn Shanahan. The form of verdict used by the jury is form of verdict number 2. We find the defendant guilty of murder in the second degree. You can be seated. Mr. Foreman, is this your verdict?
Yes, it is. They came back with the verdict of second degree, and to me, what that indicated is they gave Dixie Shanahan some sympathy for the suffering she'd endured, but at the same time, they weren't anywhere near acquitting her. They must have, and they did conclude that she intentionally killed Scott Shanahan.
When the Shelby County jury came back with its verdict, unbeknownst to them, they didn't know what type of sentence range that Dixie Shanahan would face. But by coming back with a second-degree murder conviction for her, it meant at that point in time in Iowa that she would serve a mandatory 50-year prison sentence. Judge Smith then took the time to explain, as much as he would like to take all the horrible things that Dixie Shanahan experienced and endured that led up to that shooting and the death of Scott Shanahan, he couldn't do anything about that. He was forced to sentence her to 50 years in prison, and she was sent to the Iowa Women's Prison in Mitchellville. Even though Dixie Shanahan was sentenced to 50 years in prison, there was a movement afoot almost from the day that she was sentenced to try to either overturn her sentence or change the terms of her sentence. Former Iowa Governor Tom Vilsack intervened, and he lowered the time frame that she needed to serve as far as when she would be eligible for parole. And in 2018, that is when, that would have been 14 years after she was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder at trial. The Department of Corrections paroled her, and she was finally allowed to go home.
I think that it is possible for her to be okay. I think that it will take a lot of treatment, a lot of therapy, particularly with any of that PTSD, any of that battered women's syndrome. I think it's going to be important for her to really kind of focus on, self-esteem, her self-worth, realizing that she, doesn't deserve to be beaten, she doesn't deserve to be abused, and that she is worthy.
I can only hope that Dixie was able to get some mental health while she was in prison. When she got out, she came to see me. She says, "No hard feelings." We hugged. I appreciated it. I appreciated it. It was a tough case because it's a tragedy in both respects, for Dixie, for Scott, and for the kids. A tragedy.
Having served her time in prison, Dixie Shanahan has returned to her rural Iowa home. She declined to be interviewed for this program. For many others who are still suffering from abuse, we urge you to contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline. It's completely confidential, and they can help you find a way to safety. I'm Tamron Hall. Thank you for watching Someone They Knew.
Do you know who the actor Robert Blake is? Yes. Somebody just came to my house and said, call 911.
Suddenly, the news breaks that Robert Blake's wife has been found murdered.
Celebrity cases are a nightmare.
Bonnie did despicable things.
You lied to me, you double-crossed me, and those are big lies, baby.
Whether it was in a courtroom or outside the courtroom, he was acting.
Don't do the crime if you can't do the time. Those were the lyrics from the theme song to the 1970s television series Beretta. In 2001, the star of Beretta, Robert Blake, became a suspect in the shooting death of his newlywed wife. The question was, would he or anyone else do the time for that crime?
Studio City is part of the San Fernando Valley, and it was basically a bedroom community for the studios. There are movie studios surrounding it. Robert Blake had lived there for a long time.
His property was gated, but it just looks like a nice middle-class neighborhood. It's down the street from the Brady Bunch house, but the Brady Bunch house was much fancier than his house.
Robert Blake is an actor. He's a good actor. He's acted since he was 5, 6 years old. That's all he knows.
He started out as a little rascal way, way back in the late 1930s when he was a little kid. I mean, he was in a whole slew of movies before he even turned 21.
His performance in Cold Blood is a classic. Anyone who watches it now will say it was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Robert Blake plays Perry Smith in Cold Blood.
Electric Glide in blue was just like a short cop with an inferiority complex, sort of playing himself.
You say Robert Blake, and there's a whole group out there that think, aha, Beretta. And they remember the guy with the cockatoo on his shoulder. Beretta was the pinnacle for him. He got this series. It ran for several seasons. It was very popular. He was playing a cop. And it was ironic because then he winds up in the middle of a crime case.
Blake's favorite eatery in his neighborhood in Studio City was a place called Vitello's.
Vitello's is like every East Coast Italian restaurant with the red leather baguettes, and a couple of famous people had dishes named after them. There was a Gary Marshall dish and a Robert Blake dish.
He was married to a blousy bleached blonde from Memphis, Tennessee, named Bonnie Bakley, and the two of them went out to eat. They had dinner, and then they left, went out to the car, which was parked out on the street, some distance away from the restaurant.
He took her to the car. He opened the door for her. She got in, and he suddenly realized that he had left his gun in the restaurant. He said that he carried it for her protection because she did get a lot of death threats.
He has a concealed carry permit, so it's not illegal for him to have the weapon, but he goes back to get the weapon inside Vitello's, and she is in the car with the window down.
And then he went back to the car and found her bleeding from the head. And he raced to the house that was closest, banged on the door, and the man who came to the door recognized him and said, "Robert Blake?" And Blake told him to call 911.
Fire permit, upright 30, address emergency. Okay, we need a woman was beat up at the Craft. It's actually. How old is she? How old is she, Robert?
45 years old.
She's 45 years old.
My wife, get an ambulance here.
Conscious? Is she conscious, Robert?
No.
Do you know who the actor Robert Blake is? Yes. Somebody just came to my house and said call 911.
The thing about Robert's behavior that night really weighed in his favor. He tried to get her help. He was very upset.
But it's not a normal type murder crime scene because the victim's still alive. So you sort of have to compromise certain aspects of the scene because the priority is for the victim to survive. If she survives or he survives, they get to tell you who shot them. Now, ultimately, we learned that she was shot from outside the car on the passenger side. She was shot in the shoulder. She was shot in the right side of her face. At the crime scene, when Blake is seen on the curb with the police officer, the reports indicated that he was throwing up.
At the end of the tape, police walk him to a police vehicle, and they're almost kind of carrying him. I mean, it's very gentle, and they take him to the North Hollywood police station. They continue questioning him. They also do a gunshot residue test.
GSR is gunshot residue. It's residue left from the gunpowder that explodes, that shoves the projectile out the front. It's that action that causes microscopic dust to come out. Robert's clothing, a lot of Robert's clothing was testing positive for GSR. They find a minimal amount of GSR. Robert's gun had been fired in a reasonable length of time. Simply by picking it up, we're going to get a transfer. But the amount that was on there doesn't qualify him having pulled the trigger.
He was not arrested that night. He was tested, and he went home. Eventually, the gun that killed her was found in a dumpster at the scene, right across the street from where the car was parked.
What they find is a Walther P38. Unfortunately, that gun has been covered in oil, and so they can't get any other information off of it, any other fingerprints, DNA.
It had a serial number, but it was not registered. What was really interesting about the gun is it was a World War II gun, and actually from Nazi Germany. When the LAPD tested the weapon, it was evident that they could only get it to fire 3 times, and then it would jam. The gunshot residue was so plentiful because the chamber was so loose that it would blow out a very highly significant amount of GSR. Robert may have had at best a minimal amount of GSR.
There's never any concrete evidence that this specific Walther P38 is connected to Blake.
When she was killed, there were suspects as long as your arm of people that would have wanted her dead.
He did not know that she was sending explicit photographs of herself to people all over the country.
Murder Greens from Force Factor.
Actor Robert Blake and Bonnie Lee Bakley were married for just 6 months before she was murdered. But who was she? What was her story? Blake and his high-powered attorneys seemed to want everyone to know all the sordid details.
Bonnie Lee Bakley grew up in New Jersey, the same as Robert Blake. She tried to be in Hollywood. She came out here multiple times. She had a billboard on Sunset Boulevard with her phone number on it. Bonnie wanted to be in showbiz and decided it was too much work, so why not find a guy in showbiz?
I believe. She was a celebrity stalker. She went after Robert Blake after she had gone after Jerry Lee Lewis and Christian Brando. Anybody who was a star. Blake's career had gone downhill, and he used to hang out at jazz clubs and would meet women and go to bed with them, basically. And he said that Bonnie started talking to him, and they hit it off.
By the time he drove her home and they pulled into the parking lot of the hotel she was staying at, they were already in the backseat having sex. He did not know that she was sending explicit photographs of herself to people all over the country, that it was a business.
Bonnie, it turned out, was an operator, a con artist, a grifter. She had taken a lot of nude pictures of herself, which she sent out to lonely-hearted men. She would put ads in personals and say, you know, if you send me some money, I will send you some really nice pictures of me. And she would send them nude photos of herself if they sent her enough cash. She would ask them to send her plane tickets and say she would spend the holidays with them. Of course, she wasn't going to.
By the time she met Bobby Blake, she had a way of fleecing lonely, horny old men and taking them for everything that she could get her hands on.
Bonnie had 8 different levels in her program, and the 8th level was put me in your will. And ultimately, for example, in January prior to her death, we found a copy of a check that she had received from a life insurance policy for $72,000 for somebody that she had apparently married.
She'd been married at least 9 times that we know of before Blake.
Robert's intent was to have a periodic sexual relationship with this person. Robert's intent was not to get pregnant, have a child, and develop a permanent relationship with this person.
Bonnie Bakley is known for writing letters. She writes this letter to Blake to tell him that she's pregnant. She says in the first line, "Hi, I hate to tell you this, but the pill did not work for me."
He actually tries to talk her into getting an abortion, a conversation that is tape recorded by her because she was tape recording every conversation she had with him.
You know, if you're going to do it, you have to do it really soon. I don't want to do it. I know you don't want to, but it would just make life so much easier for both of us, forever, for the rest of our lives.
She was not going to get an abortion. Are you kidding? She was pregnant with the child of a movie star. It was her dream pregnancy. She was never going to get an abortion.
The thing is, I just
I can't pay that off and kill it, but obviously you can. So that's just as bad.
You swore to me, you promised me, and it was all a lie. That's not a little lie. That's a big lie. That's the kind of lie that God looks down and says, hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute. That's a big, awful, deep, vicious lie.
That's not true. I just wanted to be with you.
As Bonnie gets more and more insistent, more and more weepy, Blake gets accusatory and essentially states the truth.
The one thing in the world, I was terrified of was anybody getting pregnant. And you did it deliberately. Why? Not because you want to be with me. It has something to do with some crazy that's going on in your head, that you want Robert Blake's baby for whatever weird, twisted reason, and that's all on you, baby. And you have to live with that.
In this second letter, Bonnie Bakley is contacting Robert Blake and letting him know that she's had the baby. She tells him, quote, well, she looks just like you.
Once he saw the baby, he knew, this is my child. And I think from that moment on, whatever fate was going to befall her was set in motion.
He told me I knew this was my blood, and I adored her from the minute I saw her. He became somewhat obsessed with the baby, actually.
After it became apparent with the paternity test that Blake was in fact the father, he did everything that he could to try to persuade Bonnie to give him custody of the child.
Robert Blake does not love Bonnie. He marries her because he's the father of the baby. And they got married between the house and the guest house. Maybe there were a few people there. There was no champagne for sure.
He didn't live with her. She lived on another house on his property. He couldn't even stand to have her in his house. That's what he thought about her. Robert Blake wanted Bonnie Bakley out of his life, in my opinion, because he felt that she would ruin their child, Rosie. He loved that little girl, and he didn't want anything bad to happen to her.
God only knows how many people over the years swore that they were going to get back at her, get even with her, or, get her killed.
Calibrate.com.
Who murdered Bonnie Lee Bakley? Police were investigating her husband, actor Robert Blake. But over the years, Bonnie had conned a lot of men out of a lot of money, any one of whom might have wanted her dead. There were so many potential suspects that police were forced to launch a nationwide investigation, one of the biggest in LAPD history.
She had been threatened so many times and taken to task for what she had done to all these guys she'd left in her wake. God only knows how many people over the years swore that they were going to get back at her, get even with her, or, get her killed.
The police actually traveled all over the country interviewing men who had known her. She had a lot of enemies and a lot of threats.
This investigation is easily one of the biggest in LAPD history. They end up traveling to 20 different states. They have 900 pieces of evidence, over 150 witnesses.
I believe Bonnie created many enemies who would want to take her out. But I'm not sure any of those enemies knew she was going to be at Vitello's that night and where she was going to be parked, and that her partner was going to go back to the restaurant to pick up his gun and then come back and find her. No, I don't think her enemies knew that.
Blake's story about what happened that night is full of holes. If you stop and think about it, Blake parked his car way, way back on a very dark street behind a very large dumpster, so nobody could really see what was back there. His story was that she was in fear of her life. She was afraid people were going to kill her because she was swindling them. And so he took along his gun for protection of her. So they went to the restaurant, they had dinner, they went back to the car, he got her in the car, set her in the car and thought, oh my God, I don't have my gun. I must have dropped it at the restaurant. So instead of taking her back and protecting her, which he was supposed to do, he left her sitting in the car by herself, and he went back to the restaurant.
Somebody came up alongside of her and shot her while she was sitting in the passenger side of the car. Not Robert. Robert was not there. For Robert to lie in wait and wait till he's in a potentially crowded area where people are coming out of a restaurant, people are walking their dogs, it's absurd to think that Robert would try and do something like that. How do you know that somebody isn't looking out the window?
In my opinion, Robert Blake orchestrated the murder. I don't think he pulled the trigger, no. But do I think he hired someone to do it? Absolutely.
Initially, police, they suspect, it seems clear, that Robert Blake committed this crime, but they don't have any evidence, circumstantial or physical evidence, to prove it. About 10 days after the crime is committed, a man named Gary McLarty walks into the police station. Gary McLarty is a stuntman. He had actually been a stuntman for Robert Blake before. He tells police he has a tip. He says that Robert Blake has come to him and offered him $10,000 to murder his wife.
Ronald Hamilton was another stuntman like McLarty that had known Blake over the years. And he, too, said he was solicited by Blake to do in his wife. And that became a lead for the two detectives that were assigned to the case.
They go to talk to Hamilton, and Hamilton tells them he's never going to speak with them about it. Police know they need Hamilton to come forward. They put together a grand jury, and they subpoena him. Once he gets that subpoena, he actually decides to speak with them. One of the things that Hamilton tells police, and this is a huge break for them, on the day he's driving around with Robert Blake, he tells Robert Blake that he should buy a calling card. And he says the reason to do this is because they're untraceable.
Robert went to a 7-Eleven down the street from the house, from Dillard, I think on Tahunga, right down from Vitello's, in fact, and he purchased the calling card.
Police are able to find the 7-Eleven, they're able to find how many cards were sold that day, and then to subpoena records from AT&T, which show all of the calls Robert Blake made with that card.
The stuntmen were very important to the case. They're the ones that made the case get filed in the first place.
The case was being investigated for about a year. Then suddenly, without much warning, we got word that Robert Blake was going to be arrested, that they were filing charges against him.
Blake was held without bail because of these special circumstances of lying in wait.
He was put in jail, and he stayed there for 11 months. That was a long time. He was not happy. It was after he was taken into custody and held at the county jail that I actually interviewed him.
Robert Blake's attorneys probably balked at the interview because they don't like their clients to be doing interviews with the media because they may slip up and say something bad.
He was a performer throughout the interview, which he later duplicated everything he said with Barbara Walters. That one got a lot of press because it was on video. He said that he loved Bonnie, that she had given him a new life. He said, here I was, a lonely guy, not doing anything, and she gives me something to live for, this little girl.
Bobby Blake had a childless daughter from a previous marriage who was now an adult and a practicing psychologist.
Delina Blake had officially adopted Rosie while her father was in jail, and she and her husband raised Rosie.
When Robert Blake was first arrested, he was Robert Blake. He had black hair, which was dyed. He was cocky and talked a lot. But when he was finally handled by some very, very good defense attorneys, he became a kind of decrepit old man with gray hair. Whether it was in the courtroom or outside the courtroom, he was acting.
Mr. Blake, I'm concerned about your condition, how you're feeling, your health. You seemed a little wobbly, so I just want to make sure that you're able to proceed today.
Drop from Force Factor.
Robert Blake's preliminary hearing was a sensational 2-week mini trial with gavel-to-gavel television coverage. Blake had not had a television or movie role in the 4 years prior to his wife's murder. Now, an entire nation was watching him star in his own real-life legal drama.
A preliminary hearing in California is held to determine if the prosecution has sufficient evidence to take the case to trial.
When he walked into the courtroom for the first time, I thought to myself, this is one great acting role. He had let his hair go all gray. He had lost all this weight. The guy that walked into the courtroom was a really feeble old man.
The preliminary hearing was like a mini trial. You heard from all the key witnesses.
Well, when you got down to it, the two stuntmen were probably their best witnesses.
I met Robert Blake thinking that I might have a movie job, some way of doubling him on a movie.
Where did you meet Robert Blake?
I met Robert Blake at Dupars on Ventura Boulevard. He started asking me how I came out of the problem that I had earlier.
And what was that about?
It was over a killing that happened, was a self-defense thing.
So you killed somebody in self-defense?
Yes.
Approximately when?
2 or 3 years.
The stuntmen were kind of dicey characters, shady characters.
If he wants to hire somebody to kill someone, you do not go to your priest. You go to the person that you think is going to do it for you. You go to the person you think needs the money, the most disreputable person you know that you may or may not trust.
What happened next?
He said, let's go over to his house for a while. He started venting about this woman that he had met somewhere at a bar, and he'd had intercourse with her, and she was pregnant.
And did he suggest to you something that you could do or could happen to her?
Yes, that somebody at night could come in while she was sleeping and go up the stairs and pop her.
And pop her?
Yes. He talked about a price, too. He said that he wanted to pay $10,000. And I explained to him that I wouldn't do anything like this. That girl didn't do anything to me.
Did the defendant have a response to what you said?
He actually said, why, I believe. And I said, why? I said, well, just your notoriety alone would be a problem.
In my opinion, Robert Blake acted every time he was in the public eye. You could tell by the movements of his head, by things that he did, that he was being a very good actor. The judge was taken in, I think, by his doubling over and appearing to be in some distress.
Mr. Blake, I'm concerned about your condition, how you're feeling, your health. You seemed a little wobbly, so I just want to make sure that you're able to proceed today.
I appreciate that, Your Honor. No, I'm fine. I'm in the pink. I've waited 11 months to get here, sir, and I'm not going anyplace. The jail has taken enough blood to float a battleship. If they could find anything wrong, I'm sure they would, sir. I'm all right. I promise you I'm all right, sir.
I believe that Blake was trying to make the judge feel sorry for him, too. After all, the judge was the one who was going to decide whether his case was going to go to trial.
The people called Ronald Duffy Hambleton. On how many episodes of Beretta do you think you worked?
Probably close to 20.
What kind of stunts would you do on that show?
Car rolls, fights, whatever came along.
The stuntmen were involved in drugs. One was a cocaine addict and one was a meth addict.
He started in telling me somewhat of the story about problems that he was having with his wife.
he almost immediately started talking about the fact that he was going to have to get rid of her.
Do you remember any of the terms that he used to talk about his wife during this trip?
He used the words, snuff is one of the words that he used. She could be snuffed while sitting in the car.
Then what happened?
At that point, we drove back to his residence. And from there, he pulled out a zippered gun case that he opened up. Inside was a .25 automatic. It looked to be a Beretta, and tried to hand it to me. He said that it was a unregistered piece. He made the comment that it's a throwaway, and that if I didn't have my own, then then this could be one that I could use, of which I did not touch.
It appearing to me from the evidence presented the following offenses have been committed, and there is sufficient cause to believe that the defendant is guilty thereof, a violation of Penal Code Section 187. I also believe that solicitations did occur with respect to Mr. Hamilton and Mr. McClarty, and that would be counts 2 and counts 3.
The judge found that there was sufficient evidence that the case should be tried by a jury.
The amazing thing was that after the preliminary hearing, Tom Mesereau, who had become his second lawyer, accomplished a miracle. He got him bail.
I am going to set bail at $1.5 million. And pursuant to Penal Code Section 1269C, I'm ordering that Mr. Blake be confined to one residence and that he have electronic monitoring.
We thank the court for your consideration, Your Honor.
Blake smokes a lot, and during the trial, because he was out on bail, he used to sit out in front of the courthouse and have a cigarette. Somebody had a guitar, and he played the guitar. One of his songs was Over the Rainbow. And he became like everybody's grandfather. That's who he was. That's who he was playing.
Who killed Bonnie Lee? Who had motive and who had opportunity? Motive. Robert Blake.
Only on Court TV.
Television cameras were banned for most of Robert Blake's first-degree murder trial. Only the opening statements, closing arguments, and verdict were televised. But there was still plenty of drama to be seen. Blake never took the stand, but both the prosecution and defense found a way to put him in front of the jury.
Robert Blake at the trial was like your grandfather. Your sweet old grandfather that had never hurt a fly.
During the presentation of the people's case, the prosecution will establish that the victim in this case was killed because the defendant wanted sole custody of their child and wanted the baby away from her mother and her mother's family. The evidence will show that the defendant thought that Bonnie's family, Rosie's other side of the family, were low-life trailer trash that all made their living working for Bonnie in her illegal schemes to scam men. The defendant thought her sister, her brother, her daughter were all convicted felons.
Shelley Samuels, who prosecuted the Blake trial, was an excellent prosecutor. All the judges knew her and respected her. I'm not sure the jury liked her.
The defendant became obsessed with the child and with keeping the child away from Bonnie and her family. Defendant's statements to jailhouse visitors. His jailhouse visits were taped. These are excerpts from those tapes.
The only thing I ever say to God is thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for the time I had with Rosie.
Yeah.
Thanks that other family can't get her. When the is all over, no matter what happens, they're going to be all right financially. Rosie is safe. Those monsters will never get her. That other family.
You will see that the defendant hates Bonnie's family. He cannot stand them. But when he goes on TV in February 2003, he lies to Barbara Walters about it.
At night, the night of her death, your relationship was a good relationship?
Yes.
A friendly relationship?
Yes. We had a lot to talk about because it was a time when her entire family was going to move to Los Angeles, and everybody was going to have to get situated someplace. So there was a lot to talk about. There certainly wasn't any downside for me.
The prosecutor used a clip from the Robert Blake interview with Barbara Walters in her opening statement. She thought that would be great because she used a little clip that made him look bad. The defense said she had opened the door and now they could play the entire interview, which they did.
Now, you saw and heard a segment of the Barbara Walters interview. I'd like you to watch and listen to a little more extended version of that.
What did I have to lose? You tell me. God gave me the gift of the century. I always thought my life was a home run. I always thought my life was a home run. And all of a sudden, at the end of the trail, I get to put the ball out of the universe. And I'm going to complain?
And in a way, this was Robert Blake testifying without cross-examination. He was poised and his usual dramatic self.
It's about Rosie. From the second I touched Rosie, it's all about her. The greatest gift in the world, and I'm going to try to mess it up by being selfish.
Mr. Blake is charged with shooting his baby. He's charged with personally shooting her. There is no evidence, none. There's no evidence, direct or circumstantial, that he shot Miss Baker.
Mesmer was no longer his lawyer. It was Jerry Schwartzbach. And he spoke so softly in court that you could barely hear him. And this was his method, and he was very effective.
Without evidence to support their charge, the prosecution has built its case on the facts of two men who were addicted to illegal drugs at the time they met with Mr. Blake. One addicted to cocaine, the other addicted to methamphetamine.
Robert Blake's attorneys had a double-barreled defense. One was that Robert Blake adored his little girl, Rosie, and he was afraid that if Bonnie Bakley lived, she might taint that child. So that was self-defense of Rosie, would have been one reason. The other was that the other dude did it. And look at all the men that she swindled, and look at all the enemies she had.
She had made her living for years, ripping off older men. She had a criminal record. Robert, he was told, you don't have to marry her to get custody. But he decided that he would. And by marrying her, Rose Lenore Sophia Blake would have her father and her mother in the same place.
Who killed Bonnie Lee? Who had motive and who had opportunity? Motive. Robert Blake. He was tricked by Bonnie Lee and he hated her for it. And he got taken by a small-time grifter. He was obsessed with Rosie. He didn't want Bonnie Lee anywhere around Rosie. He hated Bonnie Lee's family and didn't want them around Rosie. I've heard a lot of evidence about Bonnie and what she did for a living and how awful she was. And that's not what this case is about. Because all that would lead you to believe is that somehow if a person's bad enough and if they're a bad enough mother, they get to be killed and it's okay. So that's not part of this case.
No matter what she did, she was a mother of 4 children. She did not deserve to die.
I told you that there was no evidence, none, that Robert Blake shot Bonnie Lee Bakley. There's nothing to corroborate that there was a solicitation. Now there's the phone card. And somehow this phone card is supposed to be, well, that's corroboration. Well, what is that corroboration of? It's corroboration that he bought a phone card. So we know that they convicted Mr. Blake on the night of the murder. They didn't arrest him for 11 months, but they convicted him that night. They haven't proved to you beyond a reasonable doubt he personally shot Bonnie Bakley. And I would respectfully submit to you that if you do justice, you will end this nightmare for Mr. Blake, and you will give him back his life.
I believe that when you look at the evidence and you look at the instructions in this case, you will see that there is no other verdict. He's there, he has the opportunity, he has the motive. Nobody else in that 1 minute that it took to kill her was there. And for what reason would another shooter leave that gun in that dumpster? Take the chance. Only someone who couldn't leave the scene. The defendant. Thank you.
People of the State of California versus Robert Blake. We, the jury in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Robert Blake,
Nearly 4 years after Bonnie Lee Bakley was murdered, a verdict was imminent in the trial of her husband, actor Robert Blake. The trial took almost 3 months. The jury deliberated 9 days. Now Robert Blake was about to find out if he would spend the rest of his life in prison or walk out of court a free man.
All right, we are about to take a verdict, as you know, on the Robert Blake case. And when the verdicts are read, I would ask that there be no reaction. I don't want any hand clapping or yelling or booting. Remember that this is a court of law. Would the clerk please read the verdicts?
Superior Court of the State of California, County of Los Angeles. People of the State of California versus Robert Blake. We, the jury in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Robert Blake, not guilty of the crime of first-degree murder of Bonnie Lee Bakley.
The bottom line is you couldn't put the gun in Robert's hand, and that's what exactly what the jury thought.
We, the jury in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Robert Blake, not guilty of the crime of solicitation of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 653F, subsection B, to wit, solicit Gary McClarty to commit and join in the commission of the murder of Bonnie Lee Bakley as charged in count 3 of the information.
Based on the 11-1 verdict on count 2, 11 votes being for not guilty, it would appear to the court that in the furtherance of justice, a new trial on that count would not result in anything different. So I am dismissing that count in the interests of justice. So now bail is exonerated and his bracelet may be removed and his passport returned to him. Okay,
we have the right to remove
okay.
You can see that.
Okay, whatever. Okay, I guess that's it.
The jury also said that they didn't believe the stuntmen. And both of the stuntmen were kind of iffy witnesses. I personally believe their stories, but the jury apparently didn't. And Schwarzbach did a great job in cross-examining them and making them look ridiculous.
So this small band of dedicated warriors saved my life. They saved Rosie's daddy's life. If you want to know how to go through $10 million in 5 years, ask me. All you got to do is get in front of what? I'm broke.
I know.
I need a job.
Blake never worked again. He would have liked to.
Any of you gaffers got a pair of dikes?
It was sad.
Cutters, dikes.
He's a very gifted man. He was gifted with a talent for acting that was really up there with the best.
Barbara Walters, God bless you, darling. I'd have never got out of the joint with you. God bless you, Barbara, wherever you are.
The Barbara Walters interview, in Robert Blake's opinion, saved his life. He felt that he could present himself to the American public in such a way that they would think that he was an innocent man, and he did. And I think that he intuitively knew that it was going to work for him.
Did he get away with it? Sure. I mean, in some ways he did, in my opinion. But I look at Blake's case against O.J. Simpson, and, you know, it's really interesting to see that both of them got off. But neither of them got off in the civil trials, which do not require proof beyond a doubt. I think that both Blake and O.J. Simpson are testimonies living with us to this day of what happens to somebody, really happens to somebody if they get away with murder. Of course he maintains his innocence.
I always felt for people who were famous, who were acquitted, because nobody ever believed they were really not guilty. They're always remembered for the charge and not for the acquittal. You know, now if I mention Robert Blake, people will say to me, oh, is he still in prison? Well, he never was. He was not found guilty.
Some would say that Robert Blake gave the performance of his life throughout the judicial process. Since his acquittal, he's not been cast in any roles on TV or in the movies. Blake has, however, cast himself as the star of his own YouTube channel, some 30 episodes in which he reflects on his career, the trial, and life in general. I'm Tamron Hall. Thank you for watching Someone They Knew.